The sound of microphone feedback tore through the warm Hawaiian air. My brother Julian stood at the head table of my rehearsal dinner, tapping the metal mesh of the mic. He held a folded piece of paper in his free hand. He looked out at the 50 guests sitting on the lanai overlooking the Pacific Ocean and grinned. "I just want to congratulate my little sister," he projected. His voice echoed off the volcanic rock. "And thank Elias for his charity. It is not every guy who takes on a bride and a bill like this." Julian waved the paper high. $14,000 a day for this rental? He read, shaking his head. "Good thing Elias has those tech stock options, or you two would be paying this off until your silver anniversary." My future father-in-law, Richard, tightened his jaw. His knuckles turned white around his water glass. Evelyn, my future mother-in-law, stared at her untouched champagne. Julian was making sure Elias's family knew exactly what kind of financial parasite they were welcoming into their lineage. I sat perfectly still. My silk dress rustled against the chair, but my hands remained flat on the table. I did not blush. I did not reach out to stop Elias when he shifted his weight, preparing to stand and pull the microphone from my brother's grip. Instead, I offered my fiancé a fraction of a nod, a silent command to hold steady. I let Julian read the fake invoice. I let my mother Beatrice cover a smirk behind her crystal wine glass. What none of them knew was that the estate manager was standing in the shadows by the mahogany double doors, holding the actual deed to the property. My name was the only one on it. Welcome back to Idana Told Stories, the channel where quiet people finally get the last word and the paperwork does the shouting. If a family member ever made you feel like you were financially worthless, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from, and be sure to subscribe. To understand why a bride would sit smiling while her own blood tried to humiliate her at her rehearsal dinner, the clock has to rewind. 48 hours earlier, the tires of my family's rental car crunched against the crushed basalt driveway of the estate. The Pacific sun beat down, casting long, sharp shadows across the entryway. Before the engine even stopped, the rear door swung open. Beatrice stepped out, swatting at the air as if the tropical climate itself was a personal insult. "It is muggy," she declared, bypassing any formal greeting. She adjusted her designer sunglasses and scanned the sweeping architecture of the main house. "And where is the staff?" she asked. "For what Elias is paying, someone should be opening my door." I stepped forward. "Welcome to Maui, Mom." Vanessa, my older sister, slid out next, holding a pristine travel tote. She eyed the minimalist dark wood exterior of the estate. "It is very rustic," Vanessa remarked, letting the word hang like an accusation. "Are we sure the catering company can even find this place? It is miles from the resorts." I offered a polite smile. I had spent a decade perfecting the art of remaining unaffected by their subtle venom. "The directions are clear," I replied. Elias's parents had arrived an hour prior. They were already seated on the back terrace drinking iced tea. The contrast between Elias's pragmatic parents and my performative family was a stark line drawn in the sand. As the driver unloaded the luggage, Evelyn appeared at the edge of the entryway. She carried a slim leather portfolio. Her expression was tight. The polite warmth from the airport had already vanished. "Calantha," she said, her voice dropping an octave so Beatrice would not hear. "When you have a moment, Richard and I need to speak with you in the library. Just the three of us." Evelyn tapped her fingers against the leather portfolio. Inside was a post-nuptial agreement, a document meant to protect her son from the exact type of financial ruin my family was determined to project onto me. She unclipped a heavy gold Cartier pen and set it on the portfolio. The battle line for the weekend was drawn. But I knew something Evelyn did not. I did not intend to argue. I fully intended to sign it. The heavy koa wood door of the library clicked shut, cutting off the shrill sound of my mother complaining about the humidity in the hallway. The sudden quiet in the room felt heavy. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady rhythm. Sunlight filtered through the plantation shutters, casting striped shadows across the polished floorboards. Evelyn sat in a high-backed leather armchair. Richard stood near the window with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the waves crash against the distant volcanic rocks. Neither of them offered me a seat. I stood near the center of the Persian rug. My posture remained straight. I read the tension in Evelyn's tight jaw and the way she gripped the slim leather portfolio in her lap. We had shared pleasant dinners back in San Francisco. We had toasted to Elias and his recent promotion. But here, in the isolated luxury of Maui, the polite veneer was fracturing. "Calantha, please sit," Evelyn said, finally, gesturing to the sofa opposite her. Her tone held the forced calm of a corporate negotiator. I took a seat, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. I kept my breathing even. I knew what this meeting was about. My family had only been on the island for 20 minutes, and the damage was already palpable. Beatrice had dismissed the driver without a tip, and Vanessa had loudly questioned the quality of the upholstery in the entryway. Evelyn and Richard were patrician New Englanders who built generational wealth through quiet discipline. They viewed loud displays of entitlement as a symptom of financial instability. Right now, my family was screaming instability at the top of their lungs. "Elias loves you, Evelyn," began, her eyes tracking my reaction. "He is deeply committed to this marriage. Richard and I want nothing more than to see him happy, but we also have a duty to protect what he has built." Richard turned from the window. His gold signet ring caught the afternoon light. "Elias just took his cybersecurity firm public, Calantha. You know this. His assets are substantial. In today's economic climate, we must be pragmatic." I did not interrupt. I let the silence stretch, allowing them to lay their cards on the table. I understood their perspective. To them, Elias was a tech visionary. I was merely a freelance business consultant, a woman who worked obscure hours, took endless business trips to obscure islands, and seemingly owned very little. My family had spent years feeding that exact narrative. Beatrice loved to tell anyone who would listen that I was still finding myself, while Vanessa lived in a pristine suburban home. They did not know that Vanessa's home was mortgaged to the hilt, while I spent my silent years acquiring commercial real estate. Evelyn unzipped the leather portfolio. The sound was loud in the quiet room. She drew out a stack of crisp legal documents and placed them on the glass coffee table between us. "This is a post-nuptial agreement," Evelyn said, maintaining direct eye contact. "It stipulates that in the event of a dissolution, Elias's corporate holdings and primary investments remain untouched. It also includes a clause limiting spousal support based on the duration of the marriage." She reached into her purse and retrieved a heavy gold Cartier pen. She set it gently on top of the contract. The metal clinked against the glass. It was a calculated physical gesture. That pen was a boundary line drawn in the sand, separating their secure world from my chaotic one. "We are asking you to sign it tomorrow morning before the rehearsal dinner." Evelyn continued, her voice unwavering. "We instructed Elias not to discuss this with you. We wanted to present it ourselves to ensure there were no misunderstandings." I looked down at the documents, the thick bond paper, the meticulous legal formatting. I felt a familiar heat rising in my chest, but I forced it down. My hands did not tremble. I did not avert my gaze. I knew exactly how most brides would react in this scenario. They would cry, they would throw the pen, they would accuse their future in-laws of sabotage and run out to demand Elias defend them. That was the reaction Evelyn expected. She was braced for an emotional outburst. Instead, I reached forward and picked up the Cartier pen. It was heavy-balanced and cold to the touch. I turned it over in my fingers, inspecting the engraved logo. "I agree," I said softly. Evelyn blinked. Her rehearsed posture slipped for a fraction of a second. "Excuse me?" she asked. "I agree to the terms," I repeated, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. "I will review the clauses tonight to ensure the language is standard, but I have no objections. I will sign it first thing in the morning." Richard exchanged a quick, uncertain glance with his wife. The easy victory seemed to unsettle them. They had prepared for a war, and I had handed them a surrender without a single shot fired. "You understand what this means?" Richard asked, stepping closer. "You are waiving rights to a significant fortune." "I understand perfectly," I replied, setting the pen back down on the glass. "I have zero interest in Elias's corporate stock. I am marrying your son because I value his character, not his portfolio. If this document provides you with peace of mind, I am happy to sign it. Evelyn studied my face, searching for a trace of sarcasm or hidden resentment. She found nothing. My calm compliance defied every assumption they had made about my background. They assumed I was a struggling consultant, eager to latch on to a wealthy provider. A woman desperate for a bailout does not casually wave away millions of dollars. My lack of hesitation planted a tiny seed of doubt in their minds. It hinted that I had a vast, secure fortress of my own to protect. "Thank you," Calantha Evelyn said, carefully zipping the portfolio back up. "We appreciate your maturity." If that is all I said, standing up smoothly. "I should go check on my sister. I believe she is unhappy with her room assignment." I walked to the door, leaving Evelyn and Richard in a state of quiet bewilderment. They had secured their assets, but they had lost their certainty about who I really was. The postnuptial agreement was no longer their shield. It had just become my ultimate weapon. I had spent months restructuring my holding companies, hiding my equity behind layers of anonymous limited liability corporations. When the truth finally came out, that document would not just protect Elias from my family, it would protect my entire empire from his. I stepped out of the library and into the sweeping central hallway of the estate. The contrast was immediate. The quiet civility of the in-laws was replaced by the chaotic noise of my own relatives. Welcome drinks were being served on the main lanai overlooking the ocean. I could hear Vanessa complaining about the floral arrangements from 30 feet away. I walked toward the open double doors, feeling the cool trade winds brush against my face. The first battle had been won through silence, but the next conflict required noise. I paused just out of sight behind a large potted palm. Vanessa was holding a crystal tumbler of sparkling water, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the rim. She was speaking to Beatrice, complaining that the orchids looked cheap. This was my opening. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I took a deep breath, shifting my demeanor from a calculating executive to a panicked bride. It was time to give my family exactly what they wanted to see. It was time to bait the trap. The tropical sun dipped lower toward the horizon, painting the Hawaiian sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. I stood motionless behind the broad fronds of a potted palm, just inside the threshold of the main hallway. From this vantage point, I had a clear view of the welcome reception unfolding on the sweeping stone lanai. White linen tables dotted the terrace. An acoustic guitarist played a soft local melody in the corner. Servers wove through the small crowd, offering trays of seared ahi tuna and coconut shrimp. It was a picture of paradise, but the atmosphere near the stone fire pit was thick with manufactured disdain. My older sister Vanessa stood near the edge of the terrace. She wore a silk resort gown that cost more than her first car. The ocean breeze tugged at the fabric. She held a crystal tumbler of sparkling water. Beside her stood our mother, Beatrice. They were a unified front of judgment. I do not understand why she chose these centerpieces. Vanessa said, her voice carrying easily over the sound of the crashing waves. Monstera leaves and basic white orchids. It looks like the lobby of a discount dental clinic. For a destination wedding, you would think she would invest in imported peonies. Beatrice nodded, adjusting the gold clasp on her clutch. She has always lacked an eye for elegance, Vanessa. You know that. She focuses too much on her little spreadsheets and ignores the aesthetic details. I warned Elias about this. He is used to a certain standard. I listened to their critique without a flicker of anger. Their predictability was their greatest weakness. Vanessa was the undisputed golden child of the Thomas family. Growing up, her every whim was funded and celebrated. When she wanted to study art history in Paris, our parents remortgaged their home. When she demanded a lavish country club wedding 5 years ago, Beatrice drained her retirement savings to ensure Vanessa looked like royalty. Vanessa built her entire identity on the illusion of boundless wealth. She needed everyone else to appear lesser, so her own star could shine brighter. In contrast, I had moved out at 18. I paid my own tuition working night shifts at downtown hotels auditing their books while my peers slept. My family viewed my quiet, grueling ascent as a lack of ambition. Because I did not flaunt designer labels or demand praise, they assumed I was barely scraping by. They needed me to be the struggling younger sister. It was the foundation of their reality. Tonight, I was going to give them the ultimate validation. I watched Vanessa finish her sparkling water. She signaled a passing waiter, but he was already assisting Richard and Evelyn across the patio. Annoyed, Vanessa turned on her heel and headed toward the interior hallway to find the main bar. The timing was perfect. I stepped back from the palm fronds and walked 10 paces down the corridor. I stopped near a decorative mahogany console table, placing myself directly in Vanessa's path, but keeping my back turned to her approaching footsteps. I pulled my phone from my clutch. I did not dial any numbers. I simply pressed the dark screen to my ear. I forced my breathing to become shallow and rapid. I dropped my shoulders, mimicking the posture of someone carrying an unbearable weight. "Please," I whispered into the dead phone, making sure my voice trembled just enough to sound authentic. "You have to try the card one more time." Behind me, the soft click of Vanessa's heels halted. I gripped the edge of the mahogany console. "I know it declined," I said, my voice rising in a desperate plea, "but I transferred funds from my savings account this morning. The wire might just be pending. Can you please override the system for the catering deposit?" The silence in the hallway was heavy. I could hear the faint rustle of Vanessa's silk dress. I imagined her standing there, barely breathing. The ice in her empty glass gave a sharp clink as her hand tightened around the crystal. She was hooked. "Listen to me," I continued, pressing my forehead against the cool wood of the wall. "If you cancel the seafood service tomorrow, I have nothing to feed the guests. I cannot lose this venue. Just give me 24 hours to secure another line of credit. I will pay the late fee. I will pay whatever penalty you want. Just do not call my fiancé." I let out a ragged breath, a sound of pure defeat. "Elias cannot know about this," I begged the imaginary vendor. "His parents already think I am a liability. If he finds out I am $40,000 short on the final bill, he will call off the wedding. Please just run the visa again." I lowered the phone and let my head drop. I raised a hand to wipe a non-existent tear from my cheek. For 5 seconds, I stood there, projecting total financial ruin. Then I heard the swift pivot of Vanessa's heels. She did not walk toward the bar. She turned around and practically sprinted back toward the lanai. I lowered my hand and stood up straight. The posture of defeat vanished, instantly replaced by the calm precision of a corporate strategist. I slipped the phone back into my clutch. My pulse was steady and slow. I walked quietly back to the potted palm and peered through the green fronds. Vanessa had reached the fire pit. She grabbed Beatrice by the elbow, spilling a drop of white wine onto the stone tiles. Vanessa leaned in close, her face flushed with the thrill of discovered secrets. Her mouth moved rapidly. Beatrice's eyes widened. A slow, triumphant smile spread across our mother's face. They looked across the terrace toward Elias, who was chatting with his groomsmen. They looked at Richard and Evelyn. The gears in their minds were turning, calculating the fastest way to use this new information to destroy my reputation. A passerby might wonder why a bride would actively orchestrate her own downfall on the eve of her wedding. Why would anyone willingly hand their abusers a loaded weapon? The answer was simple. You cannot trap a predator unless you offer them bait they cannot resist. For years, my family had operated in the shadows. They used passive-aggressive comments and subtle dismissals to undermine me. They always maintained enough plausible deniability to look innocent. If I confronted them, they would call me sensitive. If I told Elias they were toxic, they would claim I was trying to isolate him. I could not simply tell my future in-laws that my family was dangerous. I had to show them. By feeding Vanessa this fabricated crisis, I was handing them the excuse they needed to drop their masks. They believed I was trapped in a financial house of cards. They believed Elias was my only lifeline. Fueled by decades of arrogance, they would not just whisper about this. They would try to expose me. They would try to humiliate me in front of Richard and Evelyn. They would push their cruelty into the light where everyone could finally see it. I watched Beatrice set her wine glass down with sudden, intense purpose. She pulled her designer clutch under her arm and leaned her head together with Vanessa. They were no longer complaining about the floral arrangements. They were plotting a demolition. The first phase of the trap was successfully triggered. The red herring had been swallowed whole. Now they would build a campaign of lies to ensure my new family saw me as a fraud. They would create a phantom debt and spread the infection to anyone who would listen. They were sprinting toward the edge of a cliff, and all I had to do was step aside and let gravity do the work. I smoothed the fabric of my silk dress and stepped out onto the lanai, joining the party. The evening was just beginning, and the whisper campaign was about to commence. The Hawaiian morning broke with sharp clarity. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and plumeria across the sweeping stone terrace. The infinity pool mirrored the cloudless sky, creating a seamless illusion where the chlorinated water spilled directly into the vast Pacific horizon. I sat on a shaded chaise lounge, holding a ceramic cup of dark roast coffee. My eyes traced the gentle ripples on the surface of the pool. The estate was serene, but the social undercurrents were rapidly turning treacherous. Elias sat beside me reviewing an email thread on his tablet. He wore linen trousers and a casual button-down shirt. His presence was a steady, grounding force. We were positioned far enough away from the main gathering areas to appear occupied, but close enough to monitor the entire patio. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter warmth settle in my chest. From the glass doors of the main house, my mother and sister emerged. They moved with a practiced, predatory grace. Beatrice carried a vintage leather clutch tucked tightly under her arm. Vanessa wore an oversized woven sun hat that cast dark, slanting shadows over her features. They bypassed the catered breakfast buffet entirely. Instead, they navigated a direct path toward the far end of the pool deck. Richard and Evelyn were relaxing under a white canvas cabana, enjoying the morning shade. The whisper campaign commenced the moment Beatrice stepped under the canopy. I watched my mother lean close to Evelyn. Beatrice placed a hand over her own heart, pantomiming deep maternal distress. Vanessa stood slightly behind, acting as a silent, somber witness to the unfolding tragedy. I could not hear the exact syllables drifting across the deck, but I knew the script by heart. Beatrice always utilized a specific tone when orchestrating a character assassination. It was a hushed, sorrowful cadence, designed to make the listener feel like a trusted confidant. She was currently painting a tragic portrait of a younger daughter drowning in insurmountable financial obligations. She was telling Evelyn that the wedding was a fragile facade built on maxed-out credit lines and desperate short-term loans. She was planting the idea that I was a liability. The performance reached its crescendo. Beatrice opened her clutch, pretending to retrieve a pair of tortoiseshell sunglasses. As she pulled them free, a folded piece of paper tumbled out from the leather interior. It fluttered to the warm stone deck, landing perfectly at Richard's feet. It was a calculated fumble, a rehearsed piece of theater designed to look like a careless accident. Richard bent down to retrieve the paper. As his fingers brushed the edge, the fold fell open. The document was a fabricated spreadsheet. I knew exactly what it depicted because I had watched Vanessa print it at the Hotel Business Center hours before we left the mainland. It featured rows of fake personal expenses and a glaring column of red numbers indicating severe escalating debt. Richard glanced at the paper. His pragmatic New England composure faltered. The muscles along his jawline tightened. He handed the printed sheet back to Beatrice, but the visual damage was already secured. Evelyn looked at her husband, reading the shift in his demeanor. Her own posture stiffened. The warm, familial ease they had displayed yesterday evaporated. The poison had successfully entered the bloodstream. Beside me, Elias lowered his tablet. He had been tracking the interaction. His training in the tech sector made him highly observant of patterns and anomalies. He recognized a social ambush unfolding in real time. His eyes narrowed as he watched his parents withdraw into defensive, rigid postures. Elias placed his device on the teak side table and leaned forward. The protective instinct kicked in. Elias knew the truth about my finances. He knew I carried zero debt. He knew the narrative my mother was spinning was a total fabrication. He prepared to stand up and walk across the deck to dismantle the lie right in front of them. He wanted to shield me. I reached out and rested my fingers lightly on his wrist. The physical contact halted his momentum. He turned to look at me, his brow furrowed in confusion and rising frustration. I met his gaze and offered a nearly imperceptible shake of my head. It was just a millimeter of movement, a silent, unyielding command to stand down. Elias valued transparency above all else. His success was rooted in identifying systemic threats and neutralizing them immediately, letting a toxic lie fester went against his core nature. But we had discussed this exact scenario late last night in our suite. I had asked him for a specific favor. I needed him to let my family play their entire hand. If Elias intervened now, my mother would pivot. She would laugh it off and claim it was a simple misunderstanding about an old budget. She would retreat into the shadows and continue her sabotage where we could not track it. I needed Richard and Evelyn to experience the full, unvarnished reality of the Thomas family dynamic. They needed to see the extreme lengths Beatrice would go to destroy her own blood. My family had spent decades perfecting the art of the silent kill. When I started my first consulting firm, they told my early clients I was prone to nervous breakdowns. When I bought my first car, they whispered to the neighbors that it was repossessed. They always maintained enough plausible deniability to look innocent. If I confronted them, they called me sensitive. I could not just tell my future in-laws that my family was dangerous. I had to let the danger manifest in plain sight. Elias studied my face. He read the calm calculation in my eyes. The rigid line of his shoulders relaxed a fraction. He slowly settled back into the chaise lounge. He did not like it, but he trusted my strategy. That profound trust was the foundation of our partnership. He picked up his coffee cup and looked away from the cabana, allowing the execution to continue. Across the patio, Beatrice offered a tragic sigh. She patted Evelyn's arm with feigned sympathy and tucked her fabricated spreadsheet back into the vintage clutch. Vanessa offered a final sympathetic nod before the two of them turned and walked toward the resort spa. They moved with the synchronized satisfaction of a job well done. They left my future in-laws sitting in stunned silence under the canvas canopy. Richard leaned over and spoke quietly to Evelyn. Their gazes flickered toward me across the sparkling water of the pool. The judgment radiating from them was cold and distant. The phantom debt was now a concrete reality in their minds. They believed their son was marrying a financial disaster. They believed I expected Elias to secretly foot the final bill for a luxury wedding I could not afford. The post-nuptial agreement from yesterday now seemed like a fragile, inadequate shield against my supposed greed. The morning sun climbed higher, intensifying the heat on the terrace. I watched Richard pull his phone from his pocket. He was likely drafting a message to his financial advisor, or perhaps his estate attorney. The urge to intervene, to walk over and explain everything, tugged at my instincts. It is a difficult thing to sit still while your character is being dismantled brick by brick. But true leverage requires patience. I set my empty coffee cup down and stood up from the chaise lounge. Elias looked up at me, his expression a mix of support and lingering concern. I offered him a reassuring smile, smoothing the skirt of my linen dress. I am going to check on the venue preparations, I told him softly. He nodded, understanding the subtext. He knew I was not going to inspect floral arrangements or taste test the appetizers. I was heading into the interior of the estate to check the locks on the doors I was about to close. I walked across the stone deck, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the basalt. I passed the cabana where Richard and Evelyn sat in their tense, quiet deliberation. I offered them a polite nod. They returned it with tight, strained smiles. The chill in their demeanor was palpable. My mother had done her work flawlessly. I stepped through the sliding glass doors into the air-conditioned sanctuary of the main house. The noise of the ocean and the murmurs of the guests faded away. The hallway was empty, lined with local artwork and polished mahogany paneling. I navigated the familiar corridors with practiced ease, moving away from the guest suites and toward the restricted administrative wing. The Whisper campaign had successfully painted me as a desperate fraud. Now it was time to verify the actual reality behind closed doors. I moved away from the sunlit corridors of the guest suites and navigated deeper into the interior of the main house. The chatter of the arriving wedding party faded into a muted hum behind me. The flooring transitioned from polished travertine to dense, sound-absorbing wool carpet. This wing of the property was strictly off-limits to visitors. A discreet brass plaque reading "Private Administration" marked the end of the hall. I did not bother knocking. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner concealed beneath a decorative wooden panel. A faint green light flared, and the lock disengaged with a soft mechanical click. I pushed the heavy mahogany door open and stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me with a solid, reassuring thud. That single sound severed all ties to the toxic theater playing out by the infinity pool. Inside this room, there were no fabricated spreadsheets or whispered lies. There was only the cold, hard reality of the empire I had built. The office was expansive and bathed in natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private, secluded cove. A large monitor displayed live feeds from security cameras positioned across the 12-acre grounds. I walked over to the glass wall and pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened a proprietary application linked directly to the estate's central server. My fingers moved swiftly across the screen. I dropped the ambient temperature in the main dining hall by 2 degrees, anticipating the evening humidity. I then adjusted the automated exterior lighting sequence, ensuring the pathways would illuminate in a warm amber hue exactly 10 minutes before sunset. These were not the actions of a struggling freelance consultant. They were the precise, calculated commands of an owner. "Good morning, boss," a voice said from the far side of the room. Marcus sat behind a broad walnut desk. He wore a tailored navy suit and a crisp white shirt. His posture was impeccable, reflecting decades of high-end hospitality experience. Marcus was the general manager of this estate, but his role extended far beyond daily operations. He was the regional director of my entire portfolio and my most trusted ally. "Good morning, Marcus," I replied, slipping the phone back into my pocket. He stood up and picked up a thick, leather-bound financial ledger. He crossed the room and handed it to me. His expression remained neutral, but a knowing glint shone in his dark eyes. He had been monitoring the security feeds. He had watched the elaborate performance my mother and sister staged on the pool deck. "I see the guests from the mainland are making themselves comfortable," Marcus noted, his tone carefully measured. Security noted an exchange involving a piece of paper near the cabana. The older gentleman appeared highly distressed. I opened the ledger, running my fingers over the crisp pages. "My mother is currently convincing my future father-in-law that I am drowning in debt," I explained, keeping my voice level. "She printed a fake bank statement. She wants them to believe Elias is marrying a liability." Marcus offered a tight, professional smile. "A fascinating strategy," he observed, "especially considering the property they are standing on generated a net profit of $2.4 million last quarter alone." I looked down at the real numbers printed in the ledger. The contrast between my family delusion and the factual data was staggering. This Maui estate was the crown jewel of my holding company. Its current market valuation sat firmly at $12 million, unencumbered by any mortgages. I held the majority equity. I owned the land, the structures, and the overarching corporate entity that managed 6 other luxury properties across the Hawaiian Islands. Building this reality had required immense sacrifice and total secrecy. When I left home at 18, I recognized that my family weaponized information. If Beatrice knew I had $100, she would invent a reason why Vanessa needed it. If Julian knew I secured a promotion, he would mock the company to diminish the achievement. Silence became my primary defense mechanism. I worked auditing shifts in the shadows, saving every paycheck. I studied commercial real estate trends while my peers went to parties. When I finally saved enough to purchase a small, failing boutique hotel on the Big Island, I needed a manager who understood luxury service. I interviewed a dozen candidates. Marcus was the only one who did not look at my young age and see weakness. He saw a calculated ambition that matched his own. He took a chance on my vision. Together, we turned that failing hotel into a premier destination. We leveraged that success to buy a second property, and then a third, culminating in this sprawling oceanic estate. My family never asked about my career. They assumed my quiet nature meant I was failing. I never corrected them because their ignorance kept my assets safe. Now, that very ignorance was driving them into a trap of their own making. From this moment forward, every complaint they uttered about the cheap venue or the inadequate budget would ring with delicious, dramatic irony. They were sneering at the owner while drinking her wine and sleeping under her roof. The financial summaries are all verified and updated. Marcus continued bringing my focus back to the present. The accounts are pristine. Whenever you decide to reveal your hand, the documentation is ready. Keep the folio in the safe until the rehearsal dinner. I instructed handing the heavy ledger back to him. I want them to feel entirely victorious before we correct the record. Understood, Marcus said, returning to his desk. However, we might have a slight logistical issue requiring your immediate attention. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for the report. It seems your sister is not content with merely spreading rumors, Marcus stated, pulling up a different camera feed on his monitor. 5 minutes ago, she entered the industrial kitchen. She demanded to speak with the executive chef. She is currently attempting to modify the catering contract for tonight. I walked over to the screen. The high-definition footage showed Vanessa standing in the center of the stainless steel kitchen. She was waving her hands in a frantic, dismissive manner. The catering manager stood opposite her, holding a clipboard, looking thoroughly confused. She claims she has been authorized to stop the financial bleeding, Marcus translated, interpreting her grand gestures. She is demanding we cancel the 5-course local seafood service and replace it with a standard buffet. She told the chef we need to cut the food budget by 70%. I let out a slow, steady breath. Vanessa was escalating the sabotage much faster than I anticipated. She was moving from social manipulation to direct structural interference. She actually believed the lie Beatrice invented. Vanessa thought she could swoop in and play the hero by saving the catering company from a bride who could not pay the bill. She saw an opportunity to establish dominance over the event planners and insert herself as the ultimate authority. "Shall I send security to escort her out of the kitchen?" Marcus asked, his hand hovering over the intercom button. "No," I replied, turning away from the monitor. "If security handles it, she will spin a story about being victimized by the staff. She will use it to garner more sympathy from Evelyn and Richard. I need to handle this interaction personally." I adjusted the cuffs of my linen dress and prepared to leave the quiet sanctuary of the office. The brief respite was over. My sister was actively trying to ruin the evening meal to prove a point about my supposed poverty. It was time to step into the kitchen and remind her that she possessed zero authority over my life or my event. I opened the heavy mahogany door and stepped back into the hallway, walking purposefully toward the culinary wing where the next battle awaited. The transition from the silent, carpeted hallway to the bustling culinary wing was sudden. The heavy swinging doors of the industrial kitchen muted the sounds of the rest of the estate, but they could not contain the sharp aroma of roasted garlic and seared macadamia nuts. I pushed through the metal barrier and the temperature spiked immediately. Stainless steel prep tables stretched across the expansive room under bright halogen lights. A dozen sous chefs moved with practiced efficiency, chopping vegetables and inspecting fresh catches delivered straight from the harbor. Steam rose from massive copper pots, sending a humid wave of ginger and soy reduction through the air. In the center of this organized chaos stood Vanessa. She looked entirely out of place in her silk resort wear, surrounded by white aprons and gleaming knives. She had cornered Julian, the catering manager, against a commercial refrigerator. Julian was a meticulous professional whom I had vetted for this property, but right now he looked like a trapped animal. He held the clipboard tight against his chest. A silver pen trembled between his fingers. "You are not listening to me," Julianne Vanessa said. Her voice carried the piercing frequency of a woman accustomed to blind obedience. "The 5-course seafood service is an unnecessary indulgence. I am telling you to pivot to a buffet model. Set up pasta stations and mixed greens. It is cost-effective and, frankly, less pretentious." "Ma'am, the local ahi tuna is already prepped," Julian stammered, looking down at the signed agreement on his board. The contract specifies a plated service. Changing the execution model this late will disrupt the entire service timeline and compromise the quality of the ingredients. I am authorizing the change, Vanessa insisted, tapping a manicured nail against his clipboard. We need to stop the financial bleeding. My sister made a mistake. She overextended herself. I am stepping in to ensure your company actually gets paid tomorrow. You should be thanking me for mitigating your losses. I stepped further into the room. My heels clicked against the slip-resistant tile. Vanessa heard the sound and turned her head. Her eyes narrowed. A smug, patronizing smile formed on her lips. She thought she was orchestrating a rescue mission that would permanently cement my status as the helpless younger sibling. Looking at that condescending smirk, the sterile environment of the kitchen faded away. For a fraction of a second, I was 19 years old again. The warm Hawaiian air was replaced by the freezing draft of a broken air conditioning unit in a budget motel lobby in downtown Seattle. It was 3 a.m. I wore a stiff, itchy polyester uniform that smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. The fluorescent lights above the front desk buzzed with a relentless, headache-inducing hum. My accounting textbook lay open on the laminate counter. The columns of numbers blurred together after working 10 consecutive hours. The lobby phone had rung that night. It was Beatrice. She did not call to check on my exhaustion. She called to brag. Vanessa had just purchased a vintage designer handbag using 3 different credit cards. Beatrice praised Vanessa for her refined taste, calling it an investment in her social future. My mother told me I should take notes from my sister instead of wasting my youth studying balance sheets behind a motel desk. While they celebrated manufactured prestige, I counted the loose coins in my pocket to ensure I could afford the bus ride back to my cramped apartment. The memory dissolved, leaving me standing in the immaculate kitchen of my $12 million estate. The contrast between my past sacrifices and Vanessa's current delusion settled over me like a suit of armor. I did not feel anger. I felt the supreme clarity of a chess player watching an opponent move their queen into an inescapable trap. I walked directly toward the commercial refrigerator. I did not look at Vanessa. I fixed my gaze entirely on the catering manager. "Julian," I said, my voice projecting calm authority over the clatter of copper pans, "give me a status report on the prep timeline for the evening service." Vanessa let out a sharp sigh of exasperation. "Calantha, I am fixing your mess. Go back out to the patio before you embarrass yourself further." I am negotiating a restructured menu. I did not acknowledge her presence. I did not turn my head. I kept my eyes locked on the manager. His trembling pen paused. He looked from Vanessa to me, caught in a perilous administrative limbo. Julian I repeated, utilizing a sharp corporate cadence. "As the sole authorized signatory on the vendor agreement, I need confirmation that your team is executing the original scope of work. The 5-course plated service remains active. Has any inventory been compromised by unauthorized personnel interfering with your stations?" Julian straightened his posture, recognizing the shift in command. He was a vendor who knew how to respond to decisive leadership. "No, ma'am," he replied, his voice steadying. "The ahi tuna and the lobster courses are secure. We were just discussing a proposed modification." "There are no modifications," I stated firmly. "Any requests to alter the menu procurement protocols or service delivery models must originate directly from me. You are to disregard any instructions provided by external guests, regardless of their relation to the bridal party. If anyone attempts to interfere with your workflow again, you will notify estate security and have them removed from the culinary wing." Vanessa gasped. The sound echoed over the hum of the ventilation hoods. She stepped closer, her silk dress brushing against my arm. "Excuse me," Vanessa hissed, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. "I am trying to save you from ruin. Mom told me everything about your credit cards. You cannot afford this food, Calantha. I am doing you a favor." I turned to Julian, ignoring the outburst entirely. Please confirm you have the executed copy of the master invoice with the zero balance confirmation? Yes, ma'am, Julian replied, his confidence fully restored. He tapped his clipboard. Paid in full via the primary corporate account last week. Excellent, I said. Proceed with the plating schedule. Let the executive chef know the first course must drop precisely at sunset. You are ignoring me, Vanessa demanded, stepping directly into my line of sight. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. The illusion of the sophisticated older sister was crumbling rapidly, replaced by the petulant entitlement of a child denied a toy. You are broke, Calantha. Mom saw the spreadsheet. Elias's parents know you are a fraud. I came in here to help you save face. I looked right through her. My expression remained neutral, giving her zero emotional fuel. When you fight with someone, you validate their standing. When you render them invisible, you strip them of all power. I looked back at the sous chefs who were watching the interaction with wide eyes. Thank you for your hard work, gentlemen, I said, projecting warmth to the staff. The menu looks spectacular. Vanessa stood frozen in the center of the kitchen. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I had bypassed her social authority using pure contractual reality. She was a guest, trying to give orders in a corporate environment where she held zero equity. The realization that she could not bully the catering staff into submission fractured her fragile ego. Fine, Vanessa spat, her voice trembling with rising fury. If you want to play the arrogant bride while your life falls apart, go right ahead. But do not expect us to bail you out when the final bill arrives. She spun on her heel and marched toward the swinging metal doors. She shoved them open with unnecessary force. I am getting Mom, Vanessa declared over her shoulder. We are staging an intervention right now. You have lost your mind. The doors swung shut behind her, muting her heavy footsteps as she retreated down the corridor. The kitchen fell into a brief, stunned silence. Julian let out a long breath and clipped his pen back onto his board. He offered me a discreet, respectful nod. The staff immediately returned to their prep stations, the rhythmic sound of chopping echoing through the room once more. I stood near the stainless steel counters, breathing in the scent of roasted garlic. The pressure cooker was whistling. Vanessa was running back to Beatrice, carrying a fresh supply of manufactured outrage. The Whisper campaign had failed to alter the physical reality of the event, so they were preparing to confront me directly. My mother would not accept defeat. She would escalate the conflict, demanding total submission. The trap was tightening perfectly. I turned and walked toward the exit, preparing to face the matriarch's desperate maneuver. The real war was about to begin inside the walls of the master suite. The timeline shifted forward relentlessly. The grandfather clock in the main corridor chimed 3 times, signaling that the rehearsal dinner was merely hours away. I stood in the central atrium, directing the floral team on the placement of the entrance arrangements. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but before I could retrieve it, a firm hand clamped onto my forearm. I turned to find Beatrice. Her face was set in a mask of rigid indignation. Her grip was tight, her fingernails digging slightly into my skin. "We need to speak," she declared, her tone brooking no argument. "Right now." She did not wait for my response. She released my arm and marched toward the grand staircase leading to the primary guest quarters. I followed her, measuring my steps, keeping my breathing even. We reached the top floor, and she pushed open the heavy double doors of the master suite. The room was a sprawling expanse of white linen, polished teak, and panoramic ocean views. It was the premier suite on the property, reserved specifically for the parents of the bride. I stepped over the threshold. Beatrice grabbed the brass handles and pulled the doors shut. The lock engaged with a sharp, definitive click. The sound was designed to be intimidating. It was a physical manifestation of a psychological trap. I was supposed to feel cornered. I walked further into the room and turned around. The suite smelled faintly of expensive jasmine perfume and underlying panic. On the king-size bed lay Beatrice's vintage leather suitcase. It was open. Several folded silk blouses rested inside. She stood beside the mattress, her hands resting on her hips, projecting the aura of a deeply offended monarch. "Vanessa came to me yesterday afternoon," Beatrice began, her voice vibrating with manufactured sorrow. "She was in tears, Calantha. She tried to step in and save you from a humiliating financial disaster in front of the catering staff, and you treated her like a subordinate. You humiliated your own sister." I crossed my arms and leaned my shoulder against the carved wooden doorframe. I did not offer a defense. I let her spin the narrative. "We all know the truth," Beatrice continued, pacing a short line beside the bed. "We saw the spreadsheet. We know you are funding this entire charade on credit you do not have. You lied to Elias. You lied to Richard and Evelyn. You are parading around this estate acting like royalty while drowning in obligations. Vanessa tried to mitigate the damage by altering the menu to something you could actually afford, and you dismissed her." Beatrice stopped pacing and leveled a glaring stare at me. Her chest heaved. She was waiting for the familiar response. For 30 years, this exact tactic had worked. Whenever she cornered me with an accusation, the childhood reflex was to apologize, to explain, to beg for understanding. I used to twist myself into knots trying to prove my worth to a woman committed to misunderstanding me. But that reflex was dead. It had died during the long, solitary nights auditing ledgers while my family ignored my existence. It had died the moment I signed the deed to this $12 million estate. The woman leaning against the doorframe was not her frightened daughter. I was the owner of the ground she stood on. "I have tolerated your arrogance all weekend," Beatrice stated, lowering her pitch to a threatening whisper. "I have watched you ignore the very real concerns of your family, but I will not allow you to disrespect your sister, nor will I sit by and watch you defraud your future in-laws." She reached down and grabbed the lid of the vintage suitcase. She pulled it shut. "Here is what is going to happen," Beatrice dictated. "Tonight at the rehearsal dinner, you are going to stand up before the main course is served. You will issue a public apology to Vanessa for your behavior in the kitchen. Then you will sit down with Richard and Evelyn and confess the truth about your financial situation. You will admit that you cannot cover the final vendor bills." She adjusted the brass hardware on the luggage. "If you refuse to do this," Beatrice said, her voice hardening into a blade, "if you choose your foolish pride over honesty, then your family will not be attending the wedding tomorrow. Vanessa, Julian, and I will pack our things. We will leave this estate tonight. You will walk down the aisle alone." Clack. Her fingers snapped the left brass clasp of the suitcase shut. The metallic sound was sharp, echoing in the cavernous suite. It was a practiced theatrical maneuver, a calculated auditory trigger meant to induce abandonment panic. She was utilizing the ultimate weapon in her arsenal. Do exactly as I command, or lose your family forever. Clack. The right clasp snapped shut, sealing the threat. Beatrice lifted her chin, crossing her arms, waiting for my capitulation. She expected tears. She expected me to rush forward, grabbing her hands, begging her not to abandon me on my wedding day. She anticipated a desperate negotiation, where I agreed to every demand just to keep up appearances. I looked at the locked suitcase. Then I looked at my mother. The silence in the room stretched, pulling the tension tighter with each passing second. The only sound was the distant crash of the Pacific surf against the volcanic rocks outside the panoramic window. My expression remained cold, unyielding, and entirely devoid of fear. I pushed off the doorframe and took one step toward the center of the room. "I will call the concierge desk," I said, my voice smooth and clinical. Beatrice blinked. The confident mask slipped, revealing a brief flash of confusion. "What?" she asked. "I will have the front desk dispatch a luxury black car to the main portico," I clarified, maintaining direct eye contact. The drive to Kahului Airport takes approximately 45 minutes, depending on the coastal traffic. I can have a bellhop up here in 10 minutes to assist with your luggage. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Beatrice stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The gears in her mind ground to a violent halt. I had not begged. I had not apologized. I had bypassed her emotional extortion and moved directly to logistical execution. You think I am bluffing? Beatrice hissed, her face flushing a dark mottled crimson. You think I will not walk out that door? I think you made a decision, I replied, keeping my tone flat. You stated your terms. I rejected them. Therefore, you are leaving. I am simply arranging your transportation to ensure a smooth departure. Would you like me to book Vanessa and Julian on the same flight, or will they be making their own travel arrangements? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen, holding it up. Beatrice stood paralyzed next to the bed. Her entire strategy relied on my terror of being left alone. By removing that fear, I had disarmed her completely. She was trapped in her own manipulative lie. She did not actually want to leave. She wanted to stay and revel in the luxurious surroundings. She wanted to drink top-shelf champagne and pose for photographs to post on her social networks. Leaving meant flying back to a mundane reality in economy seating, while I married a wealthy tech executive in a tropical paradise. Put the phone away, Beatrice commanded, her voice wavering, losing its authoritative edge. You are acting irrational. You are throwing away your family over stubborn pride. I am enforcing the boundary you just established, I corrected her. You issued an ultimatum. You demanded I publicly humiliate myself based on a fabricated narrative. I decline. The car will be waiting at the entrance. My mother searched my face looking for any sign of hesitation, any crack in the facade. She found a fortress of solid stone. The power dynamic in the room had shifted permanently. She was no longer the imposing matriarch dictating terms to a frightened child. She was an uninvited guest being offered the exit. You are making a terrible mistake, Calantha Beatrice whispered, though the venom lacked its previous sting. Richard and Evelyn will see right through you. When the bills come due, you will have no one. I did not respond. I simply stepped aside, clearing her path to the door. Beatrice realized she had played her final card and lost. The humiliation of the defeated bluff burned bright red on her cheeks. She grabbed her vintage clutch from the nightstand, her hands trembling with suppressed rage. She marched toward the heavy double doors, unlocking the deadbolt with a sharp twist. She yanked the door open, pausing on the threshold. Do not think this is over. Beatrice spat, her voice dropping to a harsh, guttural register. We will see how well you handle the rehearsal dinner. We will see how your new family reacts when the truth comes out tonight. She stormed into the hallway, her heels sinking into the thick carpet as she retreated. She was retreating to regroup, to find Julianne and Vanessa to prepare a final scorched earth campaign for the evening meal. She was ready to detonate the entire event in a desperate bid to regain control. I stood in the quiet master suite, listening to her fading footsteps. I looked at the vintage suitcase resting on the mattress. The clasps remained firmly shut. She had not taken her luggage. Her threat was empty, a hollow performance designed to manipulate. I walked over to the panoramic window and looked down at the sweeping lanai where the rehearsal dinner tables were being set. The white linens billowed slightly in the afternoon trade winds. The crystal glassware caught the late afternoon sun. My family was preparing a public execution. They intended to use the upcoming meal to humiliate me before Elias and his parents. They were loading the weapon, aiming directly at my reputation. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a secure internal extension. The line picked up on the first ring. Marcus, I said, watching the staff arrange the centerpieces below, it is time. Brief the security team. Lock the main exterior gates. Ensure no one leaves the property until the evening concludes. Understood, boss, Marcus replied, his tone precise and ready. I ended the call and slipped the device away. The matriarch's ultimatum had failed. The stage was now set for the main event. My family thought they were walking into a dining room to deliver a fatal blow. They did not realize they were stepping into a locked room with the architect of their downfall. The rehearsal dinner was about to begin. The descent from the master suite felt like crossing a threshold between two different worlds. The upper floors of the estate retained their pristine, isolated silence, but as I approached the ground level, the low murmur of 50 guests drifted through the open archways. The Hawaiian evening was settling in. The sky bruised into deep shades of indigo, and the automated exterior lighting flickered to life, casting a warm amber glow across the manicured lawns. I paused on the final landing of the grand staircase, keeping myself concealed in the shadows. From this vantage point, the entire sweeping lanai was visible. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a relaxed mingling of two families. Instead, it resembled a strategic deployment. Beatrice and Julian were working the crowd with practiced efficiency. They moved from cluster to cluster, carrying glasses of sparkling water to project an air of sober concern. I watched Julian approach a group of Elias's uncles standing near the outdoor bar. Julian leaned in close, adopting the posture of a reluctant messenger. He placed a hand on his chest, shaking his head with a sorrowful expression. I could not hear the exact words over the ambient acoustic guitar music, but the resulting body language told the entire story. The uncles exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them set his half-empty scotch glass down on a nearby cocktail table, as if the drink had suddenly become toxic. Julian offered a helpless shrug, pointing a subtle finger toward the main house, before moving on to his next target. Across the patio, Beatrice was executing a similar maneuver with Evelyn's sisters. My mother utilized a hushed, tragic cadence. She tapped her vintage clutch and sighed, wiping an invisible tear from the corner of her eye. The aunts shifted their weight, crossing their arms and casting judgmental stares toward the empty head table. The nature of the sabotage became clear. They were attacking the logistical foundation of the evening. They were spreading the rumor that the open bar was tapped out and the venue had cut off the alcohol supply. Beatrice was planting the idea that my accounts were frozen and that any further consumption would be billed directly to Richard and Evelyn at the end of the night. By attacking the hospitality of the event, they were ensuring Elias's family felt financially targeted. It was a brilliant and ruthless tactic, designed to force Richard into demanding immediate answers and halting the wedding. Before I could step out onto the terrace to observe the fallout, a frantic movement caught my periphery. Sarah, the lead event planner, hurried down the adjacent hallway. Her face was flushed bright red. She clutched a frayed leather binder to her chest like a protective shield. She spotted me standing on the staircase and practically sprinted over. "Calantha, we have a severe problem," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She stopped on the landing, taking a desperate, shaky breath. Her hands shook as she opened the binder, revealing a meticulously color-coded schedule that was now covered in frantic, scribbled notes. Sarah was a seasoned professional who handled high-pressure corporate retreats and complex celebrity galas, but right now she looked entirely broken. She felt she had failed her client on the most important night of the sequence. "Your brother just went to the lead bartender." Sarah continued her words, spilling out in a panicked rush. Julian told the bar staff to convert to a cash-only tab. He said the primary credit card on file was declined, and the host could no longer subsidize the beverage service. Guests are walking up to the counter and being asked for their personal credit cards. Elias's uncles are confused and insulted. Richard is currently walking toward the catering tent, looking very displeased. "I tried to override the instruction, but your mother pulled me aside and said I was enabling financial fraud." Sarah took another ragged breath. A stray tear escaped, tracing a line down her flushed cheek. "I do not know how to fix this," she admitted, looking down at her ruined schedule. "I cannot force the bartenders to pour if they believe the invoice will bounce. The entire timeline is collapsing. The plated dinner is supposed to drop in 20 minutes, and half the guests are whispering about walking out." I did not offer a sympathetic sigh. I did not match her panic. I stood perfectly still, anchoring the chaotic energy with rigid calm. In the corporate world, panic is contagious, but so is extreme competence. I reached out and placed a firm hand over the frayed binder, gently pushing it down. "Look at me, Sarah," I instructed, keeping my tone low and steady. She blinked, looking up. The sheer lack of fear in my eyes seemed to shock her system. The frantic trembling in her hands slowed to a halt. "You have not failed," I told her. "You are executing a flawless event. The interference you are experiencing is manufactured theater. It has nothing to do with your logistical capabilities." But the bar tab Sarah started. I cut her off with a precise wave of my hand. There is no bar tab. The beverage inventory is fully owned by the estate. You will walk back to the outdoor bar right now. You will inform the lead bartender that he is to pour top shelf only for the remainder of the evening. If anyone attempts to hand him a credit card, he is to refuse it. If Julian or Beatrice approach the bar again, the staff is to ignore them entirely. Sarah swallowed hard, processing the sudden shift in command. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Your mother threatened to call the police on me for authorizing theft." "My mother possesses zero authority on this property," I replied. "She is a guest. You answer only to me." I adjusted the cuffs of my silk dress, smoothing the fabric with deliberate, slow motions. The triage was complete. The bleeding schedule was stabilized. Now I needed to secure the perimeter before the impending confrontation. Sarah nodded her professional composure, returning bit by bit. She closed the binder. "I will handle the bar." "But Calantha, your family is causing an uproar. They are telling the guests they are leaving tonight. They are packing their bags. What happens if they try to walk out during the dinner service? It will cause a spectacle." I stepped down to the final stair, placing myself on the same level as the event planner. I offered her a thin, chilling smile. "They are not going anywhere," I assured her softly. I reached into my pocket and retrieved a small black radio transceiver. It was a direct line to the estate security pavilion. I pressed the transmission button, holding it close to my mouth. "Marcus," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet corridor, "initiate the perimeter lockdown." "Copy that, boss," the radio crackled in response. A deep, heavy silence hung over the estate for 3 heartbeats. Then the sound arrived. From the far edge of the sweeping driveway 100 yards away, a distinct, heavy, metallic clack echoed through the humid evening air. It was a loud industrial sound, the noise of thick, iron-locking mechanisms sliding into reinforced steel receivers. The sound reverberated against the volcanic rock walls and traveled across the manicured lawns, rolling over the lanai. The main gates of the estate were now sealed. The 12-foot-high wrought iron barriers were locked and digitized. No vehicles could enter. More importantly, no vehicles could leave. Sarah turned her head toward the driveway, her eyes widening as the finality of the sound registered. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The opulent Hawaiian resort no longer felt like a breezy tropical getaway. It felt like a gilded cage. The air grew dense, thick with the unseen reality of a psychological thriller. My family had spent the last 48 hours treating this venue like a stage for their cruel performance. They believed they could inflict maximum damage, humiliate me in front of my new in-laws, and then simply walk away whenever the consequences became uncomfortable. Beatrice thought she held the ultimate trump card with her threat of abandonment. Julian thought he could play his arrogant games and retreat to his rental car without facing any real backlash. They were wrong. They had backed themselves into a corner, and I had just welded the exit shut. "Go manage the bar, Sarah," I said, turning my gaze toward the illuminated terrace. "I will handle the rest." Sarah nodded once, a newfound respect settling over her features. She turned and walked briskly down the hallway, heading straight for the outdoor bar to execute her orders. I stood alone in the shadows of the archway, watching the scene unfold outside. The guests were beginning to take their seats at the dining tables under the string lights. Julian was currently standing near the head table, holding a microphone he had commandeered from the audio technician. He was preparing to deliver his toast. He was preparing to drop the final anvil on my reputation. I smoothed my dress one last time and stepped out into the warm Hawaiian night. I walked toward the head table, ready to take my seat. I was ready to let them spring their trap, knowing full well they were the ones caught inside it. The warm Pacific breeze swept over the illuminated terrace, carrying the rich aroma of roasted macadamia nuts, intertwined with the salty mist of the ocean. 50 guests navigated toward their assigned seats, positioned beneath cascading strings of warm amber lights. These delicate bulbs cast a golden ambiance across the heavily starched linens draping the banquet tables. I walked alongside my fiancé, moving toward the central arrangement with deliberate, measured steps. Despite the breathtaking tropical surroundings, the atmosphere felt incredibly dense. A thick, suffocating awkwardness hung directly above the elaborate floral centerpieces, entirely replacing the joyful anticipation typically associated with pre-wedding celebrations. My relatives had executed their malicious campaign with ruthless efficiency. The venom they injected into the guest list during the preceding cocktail hour was now taking full effect, saturating the venue with quiet dread. Elias reached for my hand beneath the tablecloth, his strong grip offering a silent anchor of reassurance. He remained blissfully oblivious to the true extent of the financial warfare raging around us, but his intuition alerted him to the distinct chill radiating from his own parents. Richard and Evelyn sat rigidly at the far end of the head table. Evelyn descended from a prominent lineage of East Coast generational wealth, where absolute discretion was universally considered the highest possible virtue. She viewed loud public displays of personal distress as hopelessly vulgar and utterly unacceptable. Right now, her posture resembled a carved marble statue. She leaned noticeably away from my mother, creating a vast physical barrier of stark disapproval. Positioned directly beside Evelyn sat Elias' older brother and his wife, Chloe. Chloe operated as a formidable corporate litigator based out of Chicago. She was a brilliant African-American woman who navigated incredibly complex hostile negotiations on a daily basis. Her dark, perceptive eyes continuously scanned the dining area, absorbing the bizarre social dynamics unfolding before her. She possessed an uncanny professional ability to detect fraud, deception, and hidden agendas. Right now, she was studying Beatrice with an expression of intense analytical skepticism. Chloe knew what authentic wealth looked like, and she knew what desperate posturing looked like. The Thomas clan fell entirely into the latter category. The initial culinary course arrived with choreographed precision. A small army of servers dressed in pristine white uniforms descended upon the terrace, placing delicate ceramic plates of seared local ahi tuna before every attendee. Instead of expressing basic gratitude for the exquisite meal, the Thomas faction attacked the premium seafood with voracious, unearned entitlement. They gorged themselves on the exact same high-end menu Vanessa had desperately attempted to cancel mere hours ago in the industrial kitchen. Their collective hypocrisy was nothing short of astonishing. They chewed the expensive tuna while simultaneously maintaining the illusion that the catering company was operating on a massive deficit. Across the expanse of floral arrangements, Julian held court with a captive audience of groomsmen. My brother aggressively swirled a heavy crystal glass filled with 30-year-old single malt scotch. This was the precise premium alcohol he had falsely claimed the venue management discontinued due to lack of payment. Julian always suffered from a profound, tragic disconnect from reality. Growing up, he routinely squandered his monthly allowances on flashy, impractical items while demanding I cover his basic living expenses. His entire professional career consisted of nepotism disguised as achievement and carefully managed failures subsidized by our parents. "Listen closely, boys," Julian announced, projecting his voice to cut sharply through the gentle, ambient, acoustic guitar music playing in the background. The volume he utilized was completely intentional, designed specifically to reach the ears of Richard and Evelyn. You really have to enjoy this extreme luxury while it lasts. Modern marriages are incredibly expensive endeavors, especially when one party brings absolutely nothing but massive debt to the equation. I am already setting aside a substantial contingency fund for the inevitable crash. Give it until Christmas, and I will probably have to bail these two out of bankruptcy court. He let out a harsh, grating laugh that lacked any trace of genuine humor or warmth. A few of the groomsmen offered polite, strained chuckles while staring intensely down at their laps, wishing they were sitting anywhere else. The malicious joke landed upon the terrace like a dropping anvil, plunging the surrounding dining tables into a state of mortifying silence. The overall pacing of the evening immediately ground to an excruciating, agonizing crawl. The festive, celebratory chatter died completely, leaving a massive social void filled only by the mechanical sounds of human consumption. A sharp, painful scrape echoed across the vast lanai as Evelyn accidentally dragged her silver dinner fork against her fine china plate. That single metallic screech seemed to magnify the suffocating tension pressing down upon the gathering. It served as the auditory manifestation of utter social discomfort. People chewed their roasted vegetables with hesitant, forced motions. Guests deliberately avoided making eye contact, opting instead to stare intensely at the condensation forming on their crystal water goblets. The psychological squeeze had officially peaked. My family was actively punishing everyone present, weaponizing their completely fabricated narrative to make the celebratory gathering as miserable and awkward as possible. They wanted the wealthy in-laws to feel trapped aboard a sinking ship. They wanted Elias to question his choice of bride. Most importantly, they wanted me to crack under the immense pressure. I sat perfectly still next to Elias, maintaining a rigid posture of total regal composure. I refused to flush with embarrassment. I absolutely refused to let a single tear form in the corners of my eyes. The younger childhood version of me would have crumbled completely under the crushing weight of this collective targeted humiliation. That frightened girl would have stood up immediately and begged Julian to stop his cruel monologue. She would have frantically apologized to Evelyn for the terrible disruption of decorum. But that vulnerable girl was long gone, permanently replaced by a seasoned corporate executive who intimately understood the immense strategic power of letting an arrogant enemy overplay their weak hand. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling mineral water, watching the blatant sabotage unfold with complete, cold detachment. I watched my mother devour her rich lobster bisque while simultaneously leaning over to whisper to her neighbor about my supposed looming insolvency. I watched my sister aggressively flag down a server to order a third glass of vintage imported champagne, a beverage she vehemently insisted I could not possibly afford. They incorrectly assumed my stoic silence indicated paralyzing financial terror. They firmly believed their aggressive whisper campaign had successfully broken my spirit, forcing me into total submission. What they completely failed to notice was the discreet professional standing quietly in the shadowy corner of the terrace. He was a premier event videographer, hired ostensibly to capture candid romantic memories of the rehearsal dinner. His high-definition cinematic lens tracked smoothly and silently across the banquet tables. His parabolic directional microphone was currently active, recording every single toxic whisper, every arrogant joke, and every malicious laugh my relatives produced. They were voluntarily providing an undeniable, legally binding audio-visual record of their own sociopathic behavior. They were meticulously documenting their own impending destruction. Every cruel word was safely stored on a digital hard drive. Vanessa sat 2 seats down from our mother, mirroring her posture perfectly. She adjusted the strap of her silk dress, casting a triumphant glare in my direction. Throughout our entire youth, Vanessa always served as the willing executioner for our mother's decrees. If Beatrice declared a garment was ugly, Vanessa would ensure it was ruined in the laundry. If Beatrice decided a friend was unworthy, Vanessa would spread rumors until that friend fled our neighborhood. Now, they were operating in tandem on the grandest stage they had ever occupied. They were preparing a coordinated rhetorical assault. I placed my cloth napkin softly onto the table, folding it with precise geometric accuracy. My pulse remained steady, beating with the calm rhythm of a predator waiting in the tall grass. Let them speak. Let them stand before the assembled crowd and broadcast their monumental ignorance to the world. The wireless microphone was already resting upon the wooden podium. Nearby, its small green light indicating it was live and broadcasting to the entire venue audio system. As the main courses were finally cleared away by the diligent staff, the atmosphere grew even more incredibly volatile. The sweet dessert wine was poured into fresh glasses, and the formal speech schedule was set to commence. Beatrice dabbed her mouth with a white linen napkin, noticeably adjusting her posture. She caught my eye across the table and offered a sickeningly sweet smile that silently promised absolute devastation. She thought the distinct sound of the locking iron gates earlier was simply a routine malfunction of the estate security system. She had absolutely no idea the perimeter was permanently sealed strictly by my command. She mistakenly believed she still completely controlled the evening narrative and was now preparing to deliver the final killing strike during the formal toast. Chloe shifted slightly in her seat, leaning toward Elias to murmur a discreet question regarding Julian and his employment history. The sharp corporate attorney clearly sensed the impending legal and social disaster radiating constantly from my brother. The invisible pressure cooker was whistling loudly now, threatening to blow the lid completely off the event. The psychological trap was fully loaded and ready to spring. The only task left to accomplish was to politely hand my mother the wireless microphone and allow her to pull the trigger entirely by herself. The upcoming public toast would undoubtedly become the ultimate catalyst for the greatest shock of their miserable lives. The final culinary presentation arrived with muted fanfare. Waitstaff in pristine uniforms distributed delicate porcelain plates holding vanilla bean panna cotta topped with spun sugar. Nobody at the principal table seemed interested in the elaborate dessert. The heavy social atmosphere established by my relatives had thoroughly poisoned the environment. The tropical breeze felt unnervingly stagnant. The string lights above cast harsh shadows across the faces of my future in-laws. I observed Richard staring downward at his untouched plate. His broad shoulders were rigid. A profound internal conflict raged beneath his tailored suit jacket. Richard was not a man born into privilege. He spent his formative decades in a rough industrial sector outside Detroit, constructing a regional logistics empire from the ground up. He purchased his first freight truck with borrowed money and spent the next 40 years meticulously eliminating every single cent of that debt. To him, fiscal responsibility was not merely a financial strategy, it was a fundamental moral imperative. He survived 3 separate economic recessions through ruthless budgetary discipline and absolute transparency. Consequently, he viewed financial deception as an unforgivable character flaw. He had always expressed a deep, genuine fondness for me, precisely because he recognized a shared, relentless work ethic. He thought I was a disciplined professional. Now, the coordinated, toxic whisperings of my mother and siblings were rapidly dismantling that respect. The persistent, malicious chatter originating from Julian and Beatrice finally achieved its intended catastrophic result. Richard reached his absolute breaking point. He could no longer passively endure the humiliating implications broadcasting across the terrace. He slowly pushed his chair back away from the table. The wooden legs dragged across the stone patio, producing a dull scraping sound that easily sliced through the quiet ambient music. Everyone in the immediate vicinity stopped eating. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, her expression conveying a mixture of relief and intense mortification. She knew her husband was about to intervene. Richard stood up to his full height. He bypassed the empty dance floor and marched directly toward the head table. His stride was heavy and deliberate. He did not look angry in a volatile sense. He looked profoundly disappointed, which was infinitely more devastating. As he approached the central arrangement, the background conversation surrounding us completely evaporated. The guests sensed the impending rupture. My mother casually picked up her crystal wine goblet, taking a slow, measured sip to conceal her triumphant smirk. She believed she had successfully orchestrated my total destruction. Vanessa leaned forward, resting her elbows on the tablecloth, eager to witness the final execution. Richard stopped directly opposite Elias and myself. He placed both of his large, weathered hands firmly upon the edge of our table, leaning in slightly to ensure his words remained contained within our intimate circle. His face was drawn tight, mapping the deep creases of a father terrified for his child's future. He looked at his son first, his gaze filled with sorrowful determination. Elias Richard began, his voice rumbling with a low, gravelly authority. I have sat here all evening listening to your fiancé's relatives openly mock this event. They are loudly claiming the venue vendors remain unpaid and that your bride is currently operating under massive, catastrophic debt. I tried to ignore it. I tried to dismiss it as poor taste. But the sheer volume of these assertions indicates a serious structural problem with this arrangement. Elias immediately straightened his posture, his face flushing with defensive anger. Dad, you cannot seriously listen to them, Elias argued, keeping his volume low to avoid causing a wider public spectacle. They are trying to ruin the evening. Calantha has everything completely under control. Richard held up his left hand, demanding silence. He did not look at his son. He shifted his piercing gaze directly onto me. As he did, his right hand moved instinctively toward his left ring finger. He began nervously twisting the heavy gold signet ring resting there. It was a nervous habit he only displayed during periods of extreme distress. That piece of jewelry was a commemorative gift from his late grandfather, marking the first $1 million his freight company ever generated. The physical motion perfectly showcased his painful internal war. He genuinely cared for me, but his primary biological duty was to protect his offspring from impending disaster, Calantha Richard stated, utilizing a tone devoid of warmth. I have always respected your drive. I thought you were a pragmatic, sensible woman. But if there is any truth to these claims, I need to know right now. Marriage is a partnership built entirely on trust and financial transparency. If you have actively concealed insolvency from my son to fund a lavish party you cannot afford, then you have fundamentally broken that trust. The entire lanai seemed to hold its collective breath. Even the ocean waves crashing against the distant volcanic rocks felt muted. I could feel the intense burning stare of Chloe, the corporate attorney, seated nearby, analyzing my every micro-expression. More importantly, I could feel the victorious radiating heat coming from the Thomas faction. Beatrice adjusted her posture, projecting an aura of maternal tragedy. She was ready to offer a fake apology to Richard the moment I began to weep. They fully expected me to shatter under the immense weight of the patriarch's ultimatum. They anticipated a frantic, tearful confession, followed by a desperate plea for financial rescue. Richard continued, his voice dropping another octave. If these vendors are going to lock the doors tomorrow because the final invoices bounced, I will not allow Elias to stand at that altar. I will not let him legally bind himself to financial ruin. Tell me the truth, Calantha. Are the rumors your mother is spreading accurate? I did not flinch. I did not avert my gaze. I remained seated in my ornate dining chair, maintaining absolute perfect posture. I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds, allowing the gravity of his threat to fully settle over the table. The childhood reflex to panic and explain myself was completely absent. The seasoned corporate strategist residing within me recognized this confrontation as the ultimate necessary catalyst. Richard had delivered the final necessary blow. He had inadvertently drawn the curtain back on the main stage. I looked past Richard for a brief fraction of a second. I locked eyes with Beatrice. Her smug, self-satisfied grin was permanently etched onto her face. She was practically vibrating with toxic joy. She remained completely oblivious to the fact that she had just walked directly into a steel trap of my own design. She believed the ground beneath her was solid. She had absolutely no idea the floorboards were rigged to vanish entirely. I shifted my focus back to Elias' father. I offered him a calm, measured look of complete understanding. I did not raise my voice defensively. I did not offer a frantic denial. Instead, I lifted my left wrist gracefully from my lap, resting it gently upon the pristine white tablecloth. Richard Thirst replied, my voice radiating an icy, unshakable calm. Your concerns are completely logical based upon the information currently available to you. I deeply respect your desire to protect your son. You asked for the truth regarding my financial status and the ownership structure of this wedding. You are going to receive it in its entirety. I extended my right index finger and tapped the glass face of my platinum wristwatch exactly twice. The sharp, rhythmic sound was barely audible, but it carried monumental significance. I require exactly 3 minutes of your patience, I instructed, holding his stern gaze with terrifying confidence. Please return to your seat. Do not say another word. Just watch the main entrance to the terrace. Richard blinked, his stern expression faltering into sudden confusion. The absolute lack of fear in my response completely derailed his anticipated outcome. He stopped twisting his gold signet ring. He looked down at my composed face, searching for any hint of deception or impending hysteria. He found absolutely nothing but cold, hard certainty. 3 minutes, Richard repeated softly, testing the weight of the time frame. 180 seconds, I confirmed, offering a slight, reassuring nod. After that, you may make any decision you deem necessary for your family. Richard slowly pulled his hands away from the edge of the table. He offered a curt, single nod of agreement before turning his broad back and walking slowly toward his assigned seat next to Evelyn. His wife looked up at him, her eyes wide with unasked questions. He simply shook his head silently, communicating that something entirely unexpected was about to occur. I looked back down the length of the banquet tables. My mother was frowning slightly. The immediate, tearful surrender she demanded had failed to materialize. Julian stopped swirling his expensive scotch, his brow furrowing in irritation. They sensed a shift in the atmosphere, but they lacked the necessary intelligence to identify the approaching threat. The invisible ticking clock had officially started. The psychological pressure was no longer aimed at me. It was slowly, steadily turning back onto them. The 3-minute countdown to their absolute social and financial annihilation had begun, and there was absolutely no way to stop the impending execution. The countdown commenced in total silence. 180 seconds separated my malicious relatives from their ultimate reckoning. Richard, returning to his designated seat, acted as the perfect catalyst for my brother. Observing the stern patriarch physically pull away from our table provided Julian with an undeniable surge of misplaced confidence. My older sibling erroneously interpreted the intense exchange as a broken engagement. He genuinely believed Aaliyah's father had just delivered the final killing blow, withdrawing financial support and halting the ceremony entirely. This perceived vulnerability presented a prime opportunity for a ruthless predator to strike. Julian pushed himself up from his chair, grasping the wireless microphone resting nearby. He flicked the activation switch using his thumb. A piercing, high-pitched squeal erupted through the surrounding outdoor speakers, forcing several guests to wince violently and cover their sensitive ears. The harsh electronic feedback sliced cleanly through the lingering tropical humidity, abruptly silencing all remaining background chatter. Every single pair of eyes shifted toward the center stage. My brother stood tall, smoothing the lapels of his expensive tailored suit jacket. He smiled, flashing perfectly whitened teeth, radiating an aura of toxic smugness. "Good evening, everyone," Julian announced, projecting his voice across the sprawling lanai. "If I could please have your undivided attention for a few brief moments. I know we are all incredibly full from consuming this lavish, magnificent feast. It truly is a remarkable spread. We must thoroughly enjoy these premium delicacies while they remain available, because frankly, the funds subsidizing this spectacular illusion are officially depleted." The ocean breeze suddenly died down entirely, leaving his cruel, mocking words hanging suspended in the stagnant, heavy air. The surrounding palm fronds ceased their gentle swaying, freezing like paralyzed witnesses to the unfolding catastrophe. Even the rhythmic crashing of the distant waves seemed to mute itself, yielding the auditory floor to his impending betrayal. Growing up, Julian existed purely as a pampered parasite, feeding off the labor of others. He coasted through prestigious private academies, coasted through a mediocre university degree, and coasted directly into fabricated executive positions, secured solely by our parents' fading influence. Whenever his extravagant lifestyle exceeded his meager actual income, Beatrice always swooped in to cover the deficit. She liquidated investments, sold jewelry, and remortgaged properties just to ensure her golden boy never experienced the bitter taste of genuine consequence. He possessed absolutely no concept of hard-earned capital. To him, money simply appeared magically whenever he demanded it. Because he lived his entire existence as a financial fraud, he naturally assumed everyone else operated utilizing the exact same deceitful methodology. Now he was preparing to project his own pathetic insecurities onto my reputation. Julian reached into the interior breast pocket of his jacket, retrieving a folded sheet of crisp white paper. He snapped the document open with a theatrical flourish, holding it up for the bewildered audience to clearly observe. "I hold in my hand a very interesting document," Julian declared, pacing slowly back and forth behind the head table. "It seems my dear sister forgot to properly dispose of her actual venue contract." You see, Calantha desperately wanted to impress her wealthy new-in-laws. She desired to project an image of immense, unimaginable success. So she rented this stunning $12 million estate for the weekend, a truly bold move. However, she conveniently neglected to mention the exorbitant daily rate attached to this picturesque paradise. He paused, allowing the suffocating tension to build further. Chloe, my sharp, perceptive sister-in-law, narrowed her dark eyes, scrutinizing the piece of paper from afar. As an elite corporate litigator accustomed to dissecting fraudulent claims, she immediately sensed severe discrepancies. The document Julian brandished lacked standard watermarks, official letterheads, or proper legal formatting. It was an obvious, amateurish forgery, hastily created upon a hotel business center printer. Yet to the untrained observers populating the guest tables, it resembled damning, irrefutable evidence. According to this invoice, Julian continued, his tone dripping with patronizing sorrow. The base rental fee is $40,000 per day. That does not include staffing, catering, or these elaborate floral arrangements. And judging by the frantic behavior of the event planner earlier, I strongly suspect the primary credit card on file has spectacularly declined. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered attendees. Evelyn clutched her pearl necklace, visibly horrified by the sheer vulgarity of discussing specific monetary figures in such a public forum. Richard tightened his jaw, his face hardening into an expression of pure granite. My relatives, meanwhile, practically vibrated with triumphant ecstasy. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms victoriously. Beatrice dabbed her dry eyes with a linen napkin, playing the role of the devastated, embarrassed matriarch perfectly. I sat perfectly still, allowing his towering arrogance to reach its absolute zenith. I did not interrupt his monologue. I did not attempt to snatch the fake paper from his grasp. Letting him speak uninterrupted guaranteed his actions were permanently recorded by the discreet videographer capturing every frame of this disaster. The rope he was currently utilizing to hang himself required maximum length to ensure a fatal drop. It breaks my heart to deliver this unfortunate reality check. Julian sighed dramatically, feigning deep familial concern. But living within realistic means is a fundamental adult responsibility. Perhaps next time, Calantha will learn to embrace a more modest, humble approach, instead of dragging two families into her chaotic vortex of unpaid liabilities. He lowered the microphone, preparing to offer a final condescending toast. He raised his glass of premium scotch, aiming a mock salute toward my stoic figure. Before he could utter another syllable, a massive, heavy thud echoed violently across the stone patio. The sound originated from the rear perimeter of the dining area, near the primary entrance connecting the outdoor terrace to the main residential structure. The colossal, solid mahogany double doors leading into the grand foyer had been thrown wide open, impacting the exterior stone walls with tremendous force. Standing squarely within the illuminated threshold was Marcus. The esteemed general manager of the property looked absolutely formidable. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal tuxedo that accentuated his imposing physical stature. His posture radiated extreme, uncompromising authority. Clutched securely under his left arm was a thick, heavy leather folio bearing the gold-embossed crest of the estate. The sudden, dramatic intrusion instantly shattered Julian's manufactured spell. Every head pivoted sharply away from the microphone, turning to observe the newcomer. The atmosphere shifted from awkward humiliation to palpable, electrified anticipation. Beatrice recognized the manager immediately. She correctly identified him as the supreme authority regarding the property operations. Believing the fake narrative she had meticulously constructed alongside her son, she assumed Marcus was arriving to officially terminate the event due to the fabricated outstanding balances. She saw an opportunity to cement her role as the responsible, tragic heroine attempting to salvage a mortifying situation. My mother leaped up from her assigned seat, causing her heavy wooden chair to scrape loudly against the pavement. She rushed forward, intercepting the manager as he began his steady descent down the shallow stone steps toward the dining area. "Oh, thank goodness you are here," Beatrice loudly exclaimed, ensuring her voice carried across the entire silent courtyard. "Sir, I am incredibly sorry for this massive disruption. I am Calantha's mother. We are deeply mortified by her irresponsible actions. Please believe me, we had absolutely no prior knowledge regarding her unpaid bills or her catastrophic financial situation. If you will simply allow my husband and me to review the outstanding invoices, we can attempt to negotiate some form of payment plan to prevent any further legal trouble for your lovely resort." She stood directly in his path, offering a sickeningly sweet, apologetic smile, expecting the professional to nod gratefully and hand over the demands. She anticipated becoming the savior of the evening, the benevolent matriarch rescuing her foolish daughter from immediate expulsion. Marcus did not slow his confident stride. He did not offer a polite smile. He did not acknowledge her frantic, desperate apologies. His facial expression remained completely unreadable, serving as a masterclass in professional stoicism. As he closed the distance between them, Beatrice instinctively reached out her manicured hand, intending to gently touch his forearm to establish a false rapport. Marcus expertly sidestepped her pathetic maneuver, utilizing a fluid, graceful motion that left her grasping empty air. He bypassed her completely, treating her with the exact same level of regard one might give to a misplaced piece of trivial furniture. He continued walking straight down the center aisle, navigating between the shocked attendees. His polished black dress shoes struck the stone pavers with a deliberate, rhythmic cadence that sounded ominously similar to a ticking metronome. He ignored Julian, standing frozen at the podium. He ignored Richard, watching intently from the sidelines. He marched directly toward the head table, keeping his piercing gaze locked entirely upon me. The thick leather folio containing the absolute unvarnished truth remained clamped tightly against his side. The timeline had successfully merged with destiny, and the meticulously constructed lies of my family were about to be systematically obliterated by undeniable, documented reality. The vast dining terrace fell into an absolute breathless hush as Marcus finalized his approach. He halted precisely 3 feet away from the central seating arrangement, radiating an aura of impenetrable institutional control. His mere presence instantly neutralized the toxic momentum my relatives had spent hours carefully cultivating. The general manager did not raise his voice or make any sudden aggressive gestures. He simply stood there, projecting the immense weight of the multi-million-dollar property he governed. This was a man accustomed to managing volatile celebrities, foreign dignitaries, and highly demanding corporate titans. He remained completely unfazed by a minor domestic disturbance orchestrated by a pathetic fraud. Julian, however, fundamentally misunderstood the shifting dynamic. My brother operated entirely upon a misguided belief that whoever spoke the loudest automatically commanded the room. He viewed hospitality staff as subservient peasants, existing solely to absorb his misdirected frustrations. Seeing Marcus standing silently before the crowd, Julian mistakenly assumed the manager was waiting for instructions from the designated patriarch. He puffed out his chest, attempting to assert his dominance over the escalating situation. "Listen carefully, pal," Julian barked, pointing his index finger aggressively toward the manager. "I am currently handling this financial mess. My sister clearly fed your sales department a massive string of lies regarding her solvency. We are trying to conduct a civilized family intervention here. You can take that final invoice back to your accounting office. We will not be bullied into subsidizing her delusions of grandeur." Marcus did not blink. He slowly turned his head to face my older sibling. The look he delivered contained no anger, no indignation, and absolutely no fear. It was a stare of pure, concentrated, professional disdain. It was the exact expression a seasoned zookeeper might direct toward a particularly noisy, unpredictable primate. The sheer intensity of that silent judgment caused Julian to falter mid-sentence. His raised hand slowly dropped back to his side. his manufactured bravery instantly evaporating under the crushing weight of genuine authority. Before my brother could formulate a secondary verbal assault, a new sound emerged from the surrounding darkness. It began as a low, rhythmic thud echoing rhythmically against the volcanic stone pavers. Out from the deeply shadowed archways flanking the primary residential structure, 3 imposing figures materialized simultaneously. They were elite estate security operatives, dressed in perfectly fitted black tactical suits. Their movements were entirely synchronized, projecting a terrifying military precision. They did not sprint or rush. They advanced with deliberate, calculated strides, their heavy rubber-soled boots announcing their arrival with unmistakable finality. The trio bypassed the outer perimeter of guest seating, moving smoothly through the stunned attendees. They converged directly upon the table currently occupied by my mother and sister. Within seconds, the operatives assumed a rigid flanking formation, physically boxing in the Thomas family from 3 separate angles. They clasped their hands behind their backs, standing at rigid attention. Their silent, intimidating arrival permanently altered the physical reality of the evening. Chloe leaned slightly forward in her chair, her sharp, analytical mind rapidly processing the tactical deployment. As a brilliant African-American legal strategist who routinely battled ruthless corporate adversaries, she instantly recognized the maneuver. This was not a standard customer service intervention. This was a highly coordinated containment protocol designed to isolate a specific threat. She glanced toward me, her dark eyes widening slightly as she finally began to comprehend the monumental scale of the trap I had successfully constructed. Julian stared at the security personnel, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. The social leverage he believed he wielded completely evaporated in the face of true, unyielding institutional power. He suddenly realized he was not the wealthy savior dictating terms to a desperate vendor. He was an incredibly vulnerable trespasser, completely surrounded by hostile forces. "Please place the electronic audio equipment onto the table," Sir Marcus instructed, his voice slicing cleanly through the thick tropical air. The command lacked any trace of a request. It was an absolute, non-negotiable directive. My brother swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously. He slowly lowered his arm, placing the wireless microphone gently onto the wooden surface, as if the device might unexpectedly detonate. He stepped backward, retreating away from the podium, entirely defeated by a single authoritative sentence. Marcus turned his attention away from Julianne, addressing the wider audience of bewildered guests. The manager swept his steady gaze across the lanai, ensuring every single attendee was hanging upon his every word. The heavy leather folio remained securely tucked beneath his left arm, serving as a physical anchor for his authority. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Marcus began projecting his voice clearly, without the aid of amplification. "Please accept my sincere apologies for this unfortunate interruption to your dining experience. The estate management team deeply values your comfort and privacy. However, we have recently experienced several severe breaches of our operational protocol. Throughout the past several hours, certain unauthorized guests have aggressively harassed our catering staff, attempted to verbally modify existing financial contracts, and maliciously spread entirely false information regarding the beverage inventory." A collective murmur of shock rippled through the assembled in-laws. Richard crossed his arms tightly across his chest, his stern face darkening with immense fury as he realized my relatives had actively lied to his family. Evelyn pressed a hand against her collarbone, her prior mortification rapidly transforming into righteous indignation. They were finally seeing the Thomas clan for exactly what they were. These disruptive actions constitute a direct violation of our strict hospitality guidelines. Marcus continued, his tone remaining smooth and unyielding. "We do not tolerate the mistreatment of our dedicated employees, nor do we allow malicious interference regarding the private accounts of our esteemed clients." Beatrice could no longer contain her surging panic. She witnessed her carefully constructed narrative crumbling into fine dust and desperately attempted to salvage the remaining fragments. She practically shoved her chair backwards, standing up to loudly protest the accusations. "Now you listen here," Beatrice shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger toward the general manager. "We are simply trying to help your resort get paid. My daughter is a pathological liar, masquerading as a wealthy executive. She cannot possibly afford this extravagant property. If you throw us out tonight, you will never see a single dime of the money she owes you." The ambient temperature across the terrace suddenly dropped 10 degrees. Marcus turned his head, locking his gaze directly onto my mother. The polite, professional detachment he previously maintained vanished entirely, replaced by a layer of terrifying glacial ice. He stared at her with such profound, withering contempt that Beatrice physically recoiled, sinking slightly back down toward her designated seat. Her shrill voice echoed away into the night, leaving behind a massive, suffocating vacuum of total silence. The general manager did not offer her a single verbal response. He completely ignored her desperate, frantic outburst, demonstrating the ultimate power dynamic reversal. He pivoted his body away from the disgraced matriarch, turning his full, undivided attention directly toward me. I remained perfectly seated beside Elias, keeping my posture impeccably straight. I rested my hands calmly upon my lap, projecting the serene, unbothered aura of a ruling monarch. I had allowed my family to completely exhaust their ammunition. I had permitted them to publicly expose their vile, treacherous nature to everyone present. The psychological trap was now fully sprung, and the massive steel jaws had locked permanently around their ankles. Marcus stopped directly in front of my chair. He brought his right arm forward, securing the heavy leather folio with both hands. He then executed a slow, deep, flawlessly respectful bow. It was a gesture of supreme deference, rarely witnessed outside royal courts. The profound display of respect sent a visible shockwave through the surrounding tables, causing several guests to literally gasp out loud. He straightened his posture, his expression softening slightly as he looked directly into my eyes. He recognized me not as a struggling bride drowning in fictitious debt, but as the singular, undisputed authority governing the entire sprawling estate. "Ma'am," Marcus asked, his voice resonating with absolute, unwavering loyalty, "how would you like me to handle these disturbances?" The question hung suspended above the dining terrace, heavy with impending devastation. My mother stopped breathing entirely, her face draining of all color, as the terrifying reality of the situation finally breached her thick skull. Julian gripped the edge of his table, his knuckles turning stark white as his arrogant smirk collapsed into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. They were no longer the powerful abusers dictating my inevitable downfall. They were pathetic, trapped intruders, desperately awaiting the final judgment of the woman they had relentlessly tormented their entire miserable lives. The ultimate execution was officially resting entirely within my hands. The absolute silence stretching across the lanai felt heavier than the humid, tropical air. Everyone stared at the general manager, waiting for a punchline that would never arrive. My mother remained frozen in her chair, her face entirely devoid of color. The arrogant sneer Julian wore just moments prior melted into a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror. They finally realized their catastrophic miscalculation. I slowly stood up from my seat beside Elias. My movements were deliberate and completely unhurried. I smoothed the fabric of my silk dress, projecting absolute tranquility. The time for passive observation had officially concluded. "Marcus," I stated, my voice carrying clearly across the silent terrace, "please clarify the current ownership structure of this venue for our confused guests. It seems my relatives are operating under some severe misconceptions regarding my financial stability." "Certainly, ma'am," Marcus responded. He stepped forward, placing the thick leather folio onto the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of Richard and Evelyn. He reached out with steady, precise hands and flipped the cover open. The crisp, sharp sound of heavy bond paper turning echoed loudly across the quiet patio. It was the distinct, undeniable auditory signature of legitimate corporate power. The manager extracted a stack of immaculate legal documents. These pages bore authentic embossed seals, official state watermarks, and proper notarized signatures. They were not hastily forged prints from a cheap business center printer. They represented undeniable, documented reality. For the benefit of everyone present, Marcus announced, projecting his deep voice toward the bewildered attendees, I will now clarify the financial status of this event. There are absolutely no outstanding balances associated with this weekend. There are no unpaid vendors, no desperate credit card declines, and 0 looming bankruptcies. Furthermore, there is no daily rental fee being charged for the use of this property. A collective sigh of immense relief washed over Elias and his parents. Richard unclenched his jaw, leaning forward to inspect the pristine paperwork. Evelyn closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer of gratitude. However, the initial relief was immediately followed by profound confusion. If there was no rental fee, how was this lavish production possible? Marcus did not allow the audience to dwell upon the mystery. He delivered the final, crushing revelation with brutal, undeniable precision. The reason no rental fee exists, Marcus stated, turning his stern gaze toward my horrified mother, is because Calantha Thomas does not rent this estate. She owns it. She is the founder, chief executive officer, and primary equity partner of the Pinnacle Hospitality Group. This $12 million property is merely one asset within her extensive international portfolio. She is not a struggling debtor. She is my boss. The factual unmasking hit the gathered crowd like a massive speeding freight train. The sheer magnitude of the truth completely shattered the fragile, toxic reality my family had spent decades constructing. Chloe sat perfectly still at the adjacent table. As an elite African-American corporate litigator, she understood exactly what it took to build an empire of that staggering scale. Her dark eyes sparkled with intense, profound admiration. She recognized the brilliance of my strategy immediately. She saw the flawless execution of a massive competence trap. I had allowed my enemies to publicly humiliate themselves using fabricated evidence, while I held the ultimate trump card in absolute silence. Julian gasped, clutching the edge of his table, as if the ground beneath him had suddenly vanished. He stared at the fake document still resting near the microphone, his mind desperately attempting to process the monumental failure of his malicious plan. Regarding the paper you presented earlier, Marcus continued, directing his attention entirely upon my trembling brother.
That specific document is a dummy draft. We created that template exactly 5 years ago during a training seminar for new sales associates. It was designed to teach junior staff how to properly format invoices. It has absolutely no legal or financial validity. You essentially stole a piece of worthless training material and attempted to use it as a weapon against the very woman who designed the curriculum.
The humiliation was absolute and devastating. Julian looked down at his own hands, utterly destroyed by his own pathetic ignorance. He had spent his entire life believing he was inherently superior to me simply because he was the favored son. He thought my quiet, diligent nature was a symptom of pathetic weakness. He completely failed to understand that while he was busy begging our parents for monthly allowances, I was systematically acquiring prime commercial real estate across the globe. I looked directly toward Beatrice, the cruel, domineering matriarch who ruthlessly tormented my childhood was completely gone. In her place sat a pathetic, broken woman staring blankly at the embossed legal documents proving her daughter was a multimillionaire. She had dedicated her entire existence to controlling her children through aggressive financial manipulation. Now she was sitting inside a magnificent palace entirely owned by the exact daughter she aggressively tried to ruin. Marcus stepped back, assuming his formal, rigid posture. He crossed his arms, returning his focus to me, awaiting his final orders. The 3 elite security operatives flanking the Thomas family remained perfectly still, their intimidating presence guaranteeing complete compliance. My ascent to the pinnacle of the hospitality industry was not a sudden stroke of miraculous luck. It required years of grueling, relentless labor. Shortly after escaping my toxic childhood home, I secured a low-level management position at a struggling boutique hotel in the city. That was where I first encountered Marcus. He was a brilliant, dedicated operations director, drowning beneath the incompetence of a terrible ownership group. When I finally scraped together enough venture capital to purchase my first distressed property, I made Marcus my very first official hire. We spent the next decade transforming a single decaying building into a massive global luxury brand. He knew my profound struggles intimately. He witnessed the countless sleepless nights, the brutal corporate negotiations, and the immense personal sacrifices required to achieve this level of extraordinary success. Consequently, Marcus harbored a deep personal hatred for the specific family members who abandoned me during those extremely difficult formative years. He executed his current duties with a level of cold, precise satisfaction that only a fiercely loyal ally could ever provide. The power shift across the lanai was permanent and total. Richard stood up, walking around the formal table to place a warm, supportive hand upon my shoulder. The defensive paternal anger he displayed mere moments ago had completely evaporated, replaced entirely by a profound, overwhelming respect. He finally understood the incredible strength and resilience required to survive such a venomous, treacherous family dynamic. Elias grabbed my hand, lifting it gently to press a soft, adoring kiss against my knuckles. His eyes were shining with intense, unmistakable pride. He never once doubted my fundamental integrity, but seeing the complete, systematic dismantling of my abusers clearly filled him with absolute awe. The Thomas family was entirely, permanently isolated. Their perceived social leverage was completely gone. Their assumed financial superiority was exposed as a hilarious, pathetic delusion. They were completely surrounded by highly trained hostile forces and exposed as malicious frauds before a massive crowd of influential high society peers. I turned my attention back toward my mother and siblings. The heavy silence stretching between us was no longer awkward or suffocating. It was the majestic, commanding silence of a ruling sovereign observing a thoroughly defeated rebellion. "You willingly came to my property," I began, my voice radiating a cold, dangerous calm. "You happily consumed my premium food. You drank my expensive vintage wine. You repeatedly insulted my future husband, and you actively attempted to humiliate me in front of my respected guests. You truly believed you held the absolute power to destroy my entire life." Beatrice opened her mouth, attempting to formulate a desperate, frantic apology, but absolutely no sound emerged from her throat. Her vocal cords were completely paralyzed by the sheer, crushing magnitude of her failure. Now I continued, leaning slightly forward to ensure they absorbed every single devastating syllable. "You are going to experience the exact logical consequences of your treacherous actions." "Marcus," I said, turning slightly toward the general manager, "the time for generous hospitality has officially ended." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice entirely devoid of any residual warmth. The next inevitable phase of the evening was about to violently commence. The psychological destruction was utterly complete, but the physical removal remained absolutely necessary. The captive audience watched with bated breath, eager to witness exactly how a titan of industry permanently disposes of worthless, toxic trash. The impending eviction promised to be a spectacular display of unyielding, absolute authority, setting the perfect stage for one final, desperate retaliation from a family entirely backed into a hopeless corner. They would not leave this luxurious paradise quietly, and their next chaotic maneuver would certainly require an even more devastating legal response to finally sever their bloodline connection forever. The meticulously constructed reality of the Thomas clan completely collapsed under the crushing weight of undeniable evidence. Beatrice lost all muscle control within her facial features. Her jaw went entirely slack as her panicked eyes darted between the official legal papers and my steady, unwavering gaze. The vicious matriarch who ruled our household through psychological terrorism was suddenly bankrupt of any remaining influence. Julian physically stumbled backward, retreating from the podium. His expensive Italian leather shoes caught the rough edge of a raised paving stone. He flailed his arms wildly, attempting to maintain his precarious balance. The wireless audio transmitter slipped rapidly from his sweaty, trembling grasp. The device struck the hard stone patio flooring with tremendous force. A sharp, loud electronic feedback pop erupted violently from the surrounding outdoor speakers. The piercing sound caused several sensitive guests to wince and cover their ears. That harsh auditory explosion perfectly symbolized the catastrophic destruction of his pathetic, malicious scheme. Vanessa gripped her linen napkin so tightly her delicate knuckles turned stark white. My older sister had always functioned as a cowardly, silent accomplice. She routinely relied upon Julian to execute the public social executions, while she comfortably reaped the subsequent rewards. Now she found herself horribly exposed on the front lines, without any protective cover or plausible deniability. "You lied to us," Vanessa stammered, her voice barely registering above a weak, pathetic whisper, but still remarkably audible across the dead, quiet courtyard. "You deliberately tricked your own flesh and blood into looking foolish." I finally broke my strategic silence. I did not yell or raise my pitch defensively. Instead, I projected the absolute, unyielding authority of a seasoned chief executive officer terminating a hostile corporate takeover attempt. "I never spoke a single falsehood to you, Vanessa," I stated plainly, maintaining a posture of pure, sovereign dominance. "I simply allowed your group to operate exclusively under your own toxic, malicious assumptions. Not a single person sitting at that table ever bothered to inquire about my career trajectory or my diversified investment portfolio. You were all far too busy aggressively projecting your own massive personal failures onto my existence. You desperately needed me to remain poor and struggling so you could feel artificially successful." Growing up, Vanessa constantly compared her mediocre milestones against my achievements. She ultimately married a minor local politician aiming for elite high society status, but their miserable household was secretly drowning in hidden consumer debt. She deeply resented my fierce independence because it constantly highlighted her own severe financial dependencies. Her entire fragile identity rested upon the false premise that I was the pathetic outcast. Seeing me command a global corporation shattered her delicate ego beyond any hope of repair. "Your current devastating humiliation is entirely self-inflicted," I concluded coldly. I immediately dismissed my trembling, ruined siblings from my immediate attention. They were permanently neutralized threats. I shifted my body positioning to directly face Elias' parents. Richard was still intensely staring at the embossed paperwork resting peacefully on the table. Evelyn looked equally paralyzed by the sudden paradigm shift. Her meticulously cultivated armor of aristocratic superiority had completely melted away into a puddle of profound confusion. Evelyn came from incredibly old, established wealth. Her ancestors founded highly profitable textile mills across New England during the early 19th century. She viewed inherited capital as a sacred, fragile bloodline artifact, requiring brutal, relentless protection from opportunistic commoners. She had always quietly suspected I was a cunning, sophisticated gold digger, plotting to secure a permanent, luxurious payday through her beloved, naive son. Her aggressive, protective instincts were fiercely maternal, but ultimately heavily misguided by her own rigid class prejudices. She was entirely accustomed to dealing with wealthy individuals, but she usually interacted with pampered heirs who inherited their vast fortunes just like she did. Encountering a formidable self-made woman who personally forged an international enterprise from absolutely nothing was a terrifying foreign concept to her limited worldview. I reached forward gracefully and gently picked up the certified financial statements Marcus had thoughtfully provided. I slid the thick, heavy stack of documents directly across the smooth, pristine tablecloth until the pages rested right in front of my future mother-in-law. Evelyn stared downward at the printed text, as if the paper possessed dangerous magical properties. These are the authenticated corporate valuations, alongside my detailed personal asset declarations, I explained calmly, ensuring my tone remained perfectly level. I believe Richard strongly requested complete, total transparency regarding my current solvency. You will quickly find that my holding company currently retains 0 unmanageable liabilities while generating a rather staggering annual profit margin. However, impressive financial statements alone do not guarantee long-term familial stability. I continued maintaining intense, direct eye contact with the matriarch. Earlier this afternoon, before the elegant rehearsal dinner formally commenced, you forcefully cornered me inside the private bridal suite. You expressed severe, cynical reservations regarding my fundamental moral character. You strictly demanded I sign a highly restrictive postnuptial agreement to ensure I could never drain your precious family trust fund in the disastrous event of a divorce. You handed me a draconian legal document drafted hastily by your aggressive legal team, along with your signature vintage Cartier fountain pen. I slowly reached into the hidden side pocket sewn seamlessly into my tailored silk dress. My nimble fingers closed securely around the smooth, cool metal cylinder of the luxury writing instrument she had aggressively pushed upon me hours prior. I smoothly extracted the heavy gold pen, placing it deliberately beside the corporate financial statements. Then I withdrew the folded legal contract she had utilized to ambush me. I smoothed the thick premium parchment open, pressing the creases flat against the hard table surface. You explicitly told me that true, authentic love requires absolute, unselfish sacrifice. Evelyn. I reminded her gently, but with a razor-sharp edge. You stubbornly insisted that if my romantic feelings for Elias were genuinely real, I would happily surrender any potential future claim to his substantial inheritance. I gracefully unfastened the decorative cap of the exquisite writing tool. I leaned forward slightly and smoothly scrawled my complex signature across the bottom designated line, utilizing fluid, highly confident strokes. I placed the cap securely back onto the gold barrel. I slid the fully executed, legally binding contract toward her shaking, trembling hands. The monumental paradigm shift finalized its violently rapid rotation. You fundamentally misunderstood my distinct hesitation earlier today, I clarified carefully, watching her thoroughly confused expression. I did not delay signing this insulting paperwork because I was deeply angry or personally offended by your blatant lack of trust. I purposely delayed the execution because my own elite corporate attorneys needed sufficient, adequate time to rigorously review the specific exclusionary clauses your lawyers originally drafted. We had to absolutely ensure the legal language was completely ironclad. Richard frowned deeply, his brilliant analytical mind rapidly racing to catch up with the sudden tactical maneuver. Why on earth would your corporate attorneys care about the standard protective clauses guarding our private trust fund? He asked, his deep voice laced with genuine, profound bewilderment. Because Richard I answered softly, delivering the final decisive blow, this specific document does not simply prevent me from accessing your family capital. The reciprocal indemnification clauses deeply embedded within this exact contract legally permanently block your son and your entire estate from ever laying any claim to my massive corporate holdings. The sheer magnitude of the realization crashed over them simultaneously like a massive tidal wave. I smiled, offering a small, genuine gesture of ultimate victory. You aggressively demanded an impenetrable legal shield to protect your historic legacy from a perceived destitute parasite, I explained calmly. In reality, you blindly handed me the exact, precise legal instrument required to permanently insulate my vast global hospitality empire from any potential future financial interference by your wealthy family. You successfully protected your millions, Evelyn, but you also legally surrendered any possible access to my billions. Chloe, my brilliant African-American sister-in-law, sat at the adjacent table, watching the exchange with rapt, undivided attention. As a seasoned corporate litigator, she recognized the sheer, unparalleled brilliance of the maneuver. Her dark, expressive eyes widened in pure, unadulterated respect. She slowly raised her crystal water glass, offering me a silent, profound toast to a flawlessly executed victory. She knew exactly how difficult it was for a woman to secure her own sovereign wealth, and she admired the ruthless, elegant way I had weaponized my opponent's own prejudices against them. Elias released a sudden, loud, resonant burst of joyous laughter. He threw his handsome head back, highly amused and deeply entertained by the brilliant tactical reversal. He had always despised his mother's obsessive, neurotic need for absolute financial control, and watching her own preferred weapon, expertly turned directly against her, delighted him immensely. Richard and Evelyn sat completely frozen in absolute, stunned, silent awe. They stared up at me, finally realizing the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the powerful woman their son was eagerly preparing to marry. I was definitely not a fragile, delicate bird seeking desperate shelter within their restrictive gilded cage. I was the undisputed apex predator who proudly owned the entire surrounding forest. The heavy silence surrounding the head table was filled with newfound, absolute reverence. But the peaceful tranquility was violently, abruptly interrupted. A harsh, desperate, guttural screaming suddenly erupted from the far edge of the illuminated terrace. The imposing elite security personnel were actively, forcefully grabbing Julian by his arms, attempting to physically escort him off the private property. My ruined brother was violently fighting back, kicking and thrashing wildly against the highly trained guards. He finally realized his impending eviction meant permanently returning to a miserable life of crushing, insurmountable debt without any available financial safety net. The sophisticated, elegant corporate warfare was officially concluded, but the raw physical desperation of my completely destroyed family was just beginning to explode into highly dangerous, unpredictable violence. The frantic, desperate physical struggle of my older brother provided a truly pathetic conclusion to his miserable, treacherous scheme. Julian thrashed his limbs wildly against the firm, unyielding grip of the elite security personnel. Throughout his entire pampered youth, he consistently relied upon brute physical intimidation whenever his extremely limited intellectual capacity failed him. He regularly bullied smaller, helpless classmates and aggressively intimidated the neighborhood children, always retreating safely beneath the protective umbrella of our mother whenever severe consequences loomed. Tonight, however, his childish, violent tantrums held absolutely zero power against heavily trained, disciplined professionals. The imposing guards expertly immobilized his flailing arms, utilizing swift, clinical precision. They did not exert unnecessary excessive force or display any visible anger toward his pathetic outburst. They simply contained the flailing, chaotic threat with the bored, routine efficiency of seasoned experts handling a minor, temporary nuisance. Witnessing her golden, favored child effortlessly subdued finally broke the remaining fragile remnants of the composure of my mother. Beatrice began to weep openly before the silent crowd. Large, dramatic tears cascaded rapidly down her carefully powdered cheeks, smudging her incredibly expensive cosmetic foundation. During my turbulent, painful adolescence, she constantly weaponized her crying, utilizing the tears as a highly destructive, manipulative currency. She would routinely sob uncontrollably to guilt our exhausted father into complete submission, or to forcefully coerce me into offering profound apologies for minor imaginary offenses I never actually committed. In the past, her theatrical weeping commanded immediate, frantic attention from everyone trapped inside her toxic household. Currently, her pathetic public display generated absolute zero empathy from the surrounding horrified guests. I simply reached forward, gracefully grasping the smooth crystal stem of my water goblet. I lifted the cold glass toward my lips, taking a slow, deliberate, refreshing sip of the iced beverage. I remained completely, utterly unbothered by her sudden panicked emotional collapse, viewing her tears with pure, clinical, icy detachment. I placed the crystal glass gently back onto the pristine white tablecloth. The time had officially arrived to execute the absolute final boundary. I directed my steady, unwavering gaze toward the cluster of defeated, ruined relatives. Since your collective group finds this specific luxury venue so incredibly cheap and entirely beneath your refined, sophisticated standards, I stated plainly, my voice projecting calm, undisputed authority. I am officially, immediately relieving you of the heavy, terrible burden of attending my upcoming wedding ceremony. The surgical, permanent removal of these deeply poisonous elements from my personal orbit was finally, blissfully underway. You have spent decades actively projecting your own massive personal failures onto my independent life, and I am permanently terminating your access to my hard-earned peace. Vanessa attempted to launch one final, desperate verbal defense. She stammered weakly regarding the inherent sacred value of deep family loyalty and shared bloodlines. My older sister spent her entire adult existence desperately attempting to cultivate an elaborate, convincing illusion of extreme opulence. She willingly married a minor, corrupt local politician solely to acquire elite social prestige, despite possessing full, intimate knowledge regarding his fundamental, severe financial instability. She always viewed human loyalty as a purely transactional, temporary commodity, readily discarded whenever a better, lucrative opportunity presented itself. I completely ignored her hypocritical pleas, refusing to validate her desperate, pathetic noises with any form of verbal response. I shifted my attention back toward the imposing general manager standing silently nearby. "Marcus," I instructed softly, maintaining my serene, composed posture. "Please have your security operatives escort Beatrice Julian and Vanessa off my private property permanently. They are officially classified as hostile trespassers. Do not permit them to re-enter the perimeter under any future circumstances." Marcus executed a crisp, highly respectful nod, acknowledging the final executive directive. He smoothly informed me that the personal luggage belonging to the disgraced trio had already been meticulously packed by the diligent housekeeping staff hours ago. Those heavy suitcases currently waited beside the main exterior entrance gates. The terrifying level of careful, meticulous premeditation left my treacherous relatives entirely, completely speechless. They finally comprehended that they were hopelessly outmatched from the very beginning of the evening. The heavily armed personnel forcefully marched the silent, defeated trio away from the illuminated dining terrace. The former abusers stumbled awkwardly down the long, winding stone pathway, dragging their feet heavily across the smooth pavement. They resembled exhausted, broken prisoners of war rather than distinguished, wealthy, aristocratic guests. The vibrant, beautiful tropical flora surrounding the walkways seemed to intentionally mock their ugly, bitter internal nature. Rich, fragrant hibiscus blossoms and sprawling, lush ferns framed their humiliating public exit, highlighting the stark, massive contrast between the breathtaking natural paradise and their own dark, miserable souls. As the pathetic procession finally reached the towering wrought iron boundary lines, the harsh, brutal reality of their immediate, isolated situation rapidly solidified. They were completely stranded upon an incredibly expensive, remote island without any confirmed hotel accommodations or reliable transportation. Vanessa pulled out her modern designer smartphone, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling violently against the glowing glass screen. She frantically, desperately attempted to secure emergency lodging at a notoriously cheap roadside motel located several miles down the dark coastal highway. She quickly inputted her premium platinum credit card information, fully expecting a swift, instant digital confirmation. The electronic banking transaction was brutally, swiftly declined. Panic surged visibly across her sharp, angular features. She hastily tried a second alternative card, praying for a successful authorization. The digital system rejected the secondary payment method instantly. During the past several consecutive months, Vanessa aggressively, foolishly maxed out every single available line of consumer credit, attempting to purchase extravagant, sparkling designer outfits and luxurious imported accessories. Her sole driving motivation was an obsessive, petty desire to thoroughly outshine me during this exact, specific weekend. Her desperate need to project immense superior wealth directly triggered her current, inescapable, total financial insolvency. She stood shivering outside a spectacular $12 million secure paradise, entirely locked out of the magnificent property, possessing absolutely nothing except useless, maxed-out plastic rectangles and her own suffocating, eternal resentment. The massive, heavy iron estate gates swung inward with a loud, resonant, definitive, metallic clang. The complex modern locking mechanism engaged smoothly, sounding exactly like a heavy, solid steel bank vault, sealing shut forever. The dark, toxic, painful chapter of my past was officially permanently closed. The infectious, diseased branches of my family tree were fully, completely amputated, allowing the healthy, vibrant roots of my actual chosen life to finally, properly thrive. The following glorious morning arrived completely washed clean of any lingering shadows or underlying malice. The radiant, brilliant sun rose majestically over the sprawling Hawaiian coastline, casting warm, golden, luminescent light across the gentle, rolling, pristine ocean waves. The atmosphere blanketing the expansive estate felt incredibly light, joyous, and devoid of any previous heavy, malicious tension. The intricate, complex wedding preparations proceeded flawlessly, reflecting the absolute operational perfection of my dedicated professional staff. Elias and I stood happily beneath a beautifully crafted, fragrant floral archway, exchanging our sacred, eternal vows. The deep, authentic love shining brightly within his handsome dark eyes provided the ultimate validation of my long, difficult journey. Richard and Evelyn watched us closely, with genuine, profound affection, having fully, completely embraced the formidable, impressive reality of their new, capable daughter. The older couple finally understood the incredible, massive value I brought to their distinguished family lineage. Chloe stood proudly nearby, her beautiful, expressive face radiating absolute, unwavering, supportive pride. As a brilliant African-American corporate litigator who constantly battled fierce, relentless adversity, she deeply respected the ruthless, elegant manner in which I conquered my own personal demons. The wedding transformed into a spectacular, vibrant celebration of genuine, pure love and incredibly hard-earned, lasting peace. The majestic surrounding environment provided a breathtaking natural symphony to accompany our joyous union. The rhythmic, soothing, repetitive crash of the deep azure ocean water striking against the dark, ancient volcanic rocks created a grounding, steady bass note. The continuous, gentle whisper of the vibrant emerald palm fronds swaying gracefully in the warm, steady tropical trade winds added a soft, melodic texture to the morning air. The sweet, complex, cheerful chirping of the native, colorful island birds celebrated the vibrant, beautiful dawning of a perfect new era. The massive luxury estate operated flawlessly under my absolute, complete, unyielding command. Every single minor, intricate detail was perfectly executed, reflecting the beautiful, hard-earned sanctuary I systematically, carefully secured. I fought a grueling, deeply painful, invisible war against the very specific people who were biologically supposed to unconditionally nurture and protect me. I survived their endless, cruel, treacherous betrayals and emerged spectacularly, undeniably victorious. I did not simply escape the miserable, dark, crumbling ruins of my tragic, impoverished childhood. I completely purchased the highly valuable surrounding land and constructed my own breathtaking, magnificent, indestructible kingdom right on top of it. The logical, rational consequence of extreme, dedicated competence resulted in a deeply satisfying, perfectly balanced reality. The profound, overwhelming success served as the absolute, ultimate perfect revenge. The sound of heavy iron gates locking shut is rarely a sound of triumph. In the quiet aftermath of the magnificent Hawaiian wedding, we are left to sift through the emotional wreckage of a family that destroyed itself from the inside out. The absolute collapse of Beatrice and her favored children serves as a profound modern tragedy regarding the sacred duties of parenting. When we strip away the dazzling wealth, the corporate maneuverings, and the spectacular public humiliations, we discover a deeply resonant lesson about fundamental family responsibility. This story is not merely about a brilliant chief executive officer defeating her jealous siblings. It is a stark, terrifying mirror reflecting the long-term consequences of toxic parenting within American culture. The illusion of conditional affection. Traditional family structures thrive upon a bedrock of absolute trust and unyielding fairness. Parents are biologically and morally tasked with providing a secure emotional foundation for their offspring. Beatrice fundamentally failed this prime directive. She weaponized her affection, treating a mother's love as a scarce financial commodity, traded only for absolute obedience and superficial social performance. She openly favored Julian, granting him unearned authority and boundless financial safety nets, while entirely depriving Calantha of basic emotional support. This specific type of parental favoritism is incredibly destructive. It creates a horrific dynamic where children stop viewing each other as natural allies and instead become bitter, lifelong competitors, fighting for scraps of maternal validation. When parents abandon fairness, they inadvertently teach their children that love is never guaranteed. Julian learned that he could behave with extreme cruelty without ever facing logical consequences. He was trained to believe that his mere existence entitled him to supreme respect. Conversely, Vanessa learned that her authentic self was entirely inadequate. She spent her entire adult life desperately accumulating massive consumer debt to project a fake illusion of success simply because her mother only valued shiny external appearances. The absence of emotional awareness. Raising capable, resilient children requires a deep commitment to emotional awareness. A responsible parent must guide their child through the difficult process of understanding their own internal landscape. Beatrice never possessed the courage to face her own deep-seated insecurities, so she actively projected her massive personal failures onto her children. She used Julian as a blunt instrument of control, and she utilized Vanessa as a silent, complicit audience. By refusing to cultivate genuine emotional intelligence within her household, the matriarch guaranteed the ultimate destruction of her favored offspring. Julian and Vanessa entered the harsh, demanding adult world completely unarmed. They possessed absolutely zero coping mechanisms for failure. When confronted with the undeniable, staggering reality of the magnificent global empire their sister built, they experienced a total psychological collapse. They could not process their intense jealousy logically. Instead of feeling a sense of shared familial pride, they immediately resorted to malicious sabotage. Their complete inability to regulate their dark, envious emotions directly resulted in their permanent social and financial ruin. True strength is born from accountability. A child shielded from all consequences will inevitably crumble when the real world eventually demands competence. Authenticity cannot be purchased. Material wealth is a terrible substitute for genuine self-esteem and moral integrity. Resilience requires difficult honesty. Recognizing personal flaws is the necessary first step toward achieving lasting personal growth. The heavy burden of the scapegoat. There is a profound, bitter irony embedded deeply within this specific family dynamic. The child who receives the absolute least amount of parental support often develops the highest level of profound resilience. Calantha was the designated scapegoat, constantly blamed for the collective misery of her household. She was systematically denied the soft, luxurious cushions her siblings freely enjoyed. Yet that exact, brutal deprivation forged an unbreakable iron will. She learned to rely entirely upon her own sharp intellect and relentless work ethic. Her spectacular ascent to the pinnacle of the international hospitality industry perfectly illustrates a core tenet of the American dream. True, lasting success is rarely inherited without immense struggle. It is actively built through grueling, sustained effort and unwavering personal discipline. However, we must carefully examine the terrible psychological cost of that specific journey. Calantha achieved extraordinary global power, but she was forced to permanently sever her biological roots to ensure her own fundamental survival. She had to meticulously construct an impenetrable corporate fortress just to protect herself from the very people who were supposed to unconditionally love her. Her ultimate victory is magnificent, but it carries the heavy, solemn weight of a deeply profound grieving process for the loving family she never actually received. A universal reflection on generational legacy. As we observe the stunning conclusion of this fierce domestic battle, we are forced to reevaluate our own specific roles within our respective family units. Are we actively fostering an environment rooted in deep honesty and uncompromising fairness? Do we quickly intervene to gently correct the cruel behavior of our children? Or do we look away to avoid uncomfortable, necessary confrontations? The legacy we ultimately leave behind is not measured by the size of our inherited trust funds or the prestigious titles attached to our professional careers. Our true, enduring legacy is the fundamental character of the human beings we release into the broader society. If you found this deep exploration of family dynamics and complex human psychology compelling, please consider subscribing to the channel Adana Told Stories. We consistently explore intricate, captivating narratives that challenge our everyday perspectives and illuminate the hidden, fascinating truths guiding our daily personal relationships. Join our growing community of thoughtful listeners as we continue unraveling the profound, complex mysteries of the modern human experience. As the gentle Hawaiian trade winds sweep across the magnificent isolated estate, the lingering silence leaves us grappling with an uncomfortable, haunting question. We spend our entire lives desperately trying to build a perfectly secure home. We carefully arrange the beautiful furniture, we polish the expensive silver, and we tightly lock the heavy front doors to keep the dangerous, unpredictable world outside. But what happens when we finally realize the most dangerous, destructive elements were never hiding in the dark shadows beyond the perimeter? What happens when we realize the greatest threat was sitting quietly across from us at the dining table the entire time? You might spend decades watering the roots of your family tree, hoping for beautiful, fragrant blossoms, only to suddenly discover you have been carefully cultivating a garden full of poisonous thorns. And by the time you finally recognize the toxic harvest, it might be entirely too late to save the surrounding soil.